Andrew walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating like a caged bird. Multicolored blotches flashed before his eyes, and his breath hitched, though he hardly felt. He wanted to be away from the restaurant sooner, where such a surprise awaited him. This trip was going to be a pleasant, easy one. A childhood friend, Kevin, had invited Andrew to the wedding. The man was surprised because he had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. But then the wedding came up. Andrew was curious to see the woman who had managed to win over his freedom-loving friend. He was looking forward to seeing old friends, seeing his hometown, and reminiscing about the past. Of course, Andrew could not miss such an occasion. After all, it was a bright and warm event in a series of gray, everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work to be in his former company. Andrew was a more than successful man, but he's had a hard time making it work. He lives and works in Moscow, managed to escape from the provincial town where he actually rushed to. But few people know that Andrew works on a rank-and-file position in not the most prosperous company, and every day spends at least 4 hours on the road to work and back. Because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the capital, in not the most prestigious neighborhood. His cramped two-bedroom has long been in need of repair, but Andrew does not want to get involved in this epic. Why? He's fine as he is. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. What single bachelor needs all this beauty? And he's not ready to spend a lot of money on repairs. His salary does not allow him to live in luxury and allow himself to excesses. Personal life does not add up either. There are, of course, temporary romances, but it's not serious. Andrew mainly attracts ladies who need a place to live. At his expense, they can save on rent until they get settled in Moscow. Andrew sees perfectly well the intentions of such women. Looks, words, actions, all this gives away their true goals. Unpleasant, of course, but probably by the age of 35, it's time to realize that perfect, pure love may not exist. Everyone in a relationship is pursuing their own interests. When you were young, it seemed that one day the perfect girl would meet on your way. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere, household and caring, but at the same time self-sufficient and able to occupy yourself when you go out with friends. One who will adore her spouse and be his or her rock-solid support. With such smiling beauty, Andrew dreamed of building a family and living happily ever after. Remembering his dreams, Andrew was amazed at his naivety. There are no fairy tale women or perfect relationships, as indeed in situations when everything in life perfectly suits. This realization came with time, in worse, as appointments awaited him at every step. In work, personal life, everyday life. How many hopes and plans he had for New York. When his youth, it seemed that it was enough just to leave his hometown, and life will shine with bright colors. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, fun parties, new friends. In fact, everything turned out differently. A small two-bedroom on the outskirts, in an old house, far from civilization. And for this modest apartment, Andrew is not yet fully paid off. Relatives helped with the first installment, which in his hometown could be used to buy a spacious home and make a luxurious renovation. But in New York, it was only a fraction of the cost of an old apartment on the top floor of a house without an elevator. Nevertheless, at the beginning of his journey to the capital, Andrew was full of hope and felt happy to have finally broken free. It was breaking free. That's how he felt, believing that everything would work out properly now. Freedom strengthened the prospects that were opening up, making his head spin. Andrew was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. Andrew left his mother, grandparents, friends, and Alex behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was beginning to take a turn for the overly serious. The girl, Andrew, of course, good, pretty, modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings frightened the guy. And anyway, how many such years he still has ahead of him? Not to take her with him to New York. In the end, Andrew quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as the guy imagined at home. Igor, however, was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. In addition, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere, because everything is still ahead, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. Andrew was still working in low-paid jobs. To climb the career ladder, you need connections or great brains, well as incredible efficiency, love of work, passion for the cause. Igor had none of these things. He served working hours in the office as a duty, received at the end of the month a salary, most of which was given to mandatory payments. Rent, loans, mortgages, the rest of it he pulled until the next paycheck. Andrew always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were certainly plenty of them in New York, but Andrew was not attracted to them at all. What could attract a young beauty to a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? Back in his own town, Andrew had once been an eligible suitor, the grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. He felt he was the best of the best there. He had a lot of friends, girls were looking at him, but Andrew always dreamed of more. He dreamed of the big city, thought he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his hometown. Andrew often spoke contemptuously about life in the province, called his small homeland collective farms and swamps. He assured me that he would never stay here. But he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? First of all, Andrew's years in the capital have made him a liability in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off, and the salary in New York is still much higher than in a small town. Andrew realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt, and there was no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be an upstanding man, a respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved retirement. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how is it possible to return after Andrew assured his friends that life in a small town is not for him? After scornful words about his small homeland. Okay, let's be honest. After bragging to his acquaintances, to admit to the whole city his failure and failure to admit his own insignificance, well, no, Andrew could not do that. Especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives, Andrew was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in Moscow in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks, he put up photos which, in his opinion, supported the status of a... It is funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the firm where Andrew worked organized corporate parties for employees. And on Andrew's page, after such festivities, appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once Andrew's colleague came to work in an expensive foreign car rented from his brother. Andrew took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo in his profile that evening, laughing at himself. That sort of thing. Andrew was making it look like he had a life he never had, and he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from the town. They were convinced that Andrew had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come true, and Andrew was happy with that. But at least in the minds of his friends and relatives, he would be so successful and happy. Andrew grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she fattened him up. Andrew was the fruit of a banal resort romance student and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who really was his father, Andrew did not know and believed that now he will never know. This man, he does not even suspect the existence of his son, and, of course, has probably already forgotten about the affair that happened so many years ago, or maybe he's not even alive at all. And then there's the mother. She knew nothing about her resort lover. It's simple. His mother did not plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she was not interested in the details of his life. She certainly didn't ask for his address and passport. She just wanted to have fun. She found herself away from the control and custody of strict parents, and in the end, it all turned out like this. Andrew was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth. Even though she kind of wanted an abortion, Andrew suspected it was his grandfather who kept him alive. Grandfather, after all, he is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had fathered a child out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped and made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he got 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the youngest made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, gave birth, finally, to a boy. Andrew's childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, much attention to her son did not pay. She was working or trying to organize her personal life, but Andrew still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a celebratory person, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents loved him. Andrew later realized that his grandmother felt very sorry for him. But how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother doesn't do much with him. He just shows up once in a while like a ray of light and then disappears again. That's why grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth and cooked for him delicious dishes, and read bedtime stories to him, and walked with her grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around all the playgrounds with him. Grandma's warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what Andrew did, she was always at his side, even if her favorite grandchild was at fault. If Andrew was involved in a fight, grandmother unconditionally considered the other party missing bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If the grandson got a D, grandma turned on the teacher with her prejudice. Andrew loved grandma too. It was nice to know that there was such a person in the world for whom the light in the window, the best, the most beautiful and smart. Andrew had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling. He could shout at his grandson and even give him an easy backhand under the wailing and groaning of his wife. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically gave Andrew a sense of security. Grandfather was solid as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, plans for life. Grandfather had such conversations with Andrew from an early age, and the boy loved these moments. And grandfather often took his grandson to work with him. There, the boy saw how respectfully other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. Andrew realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People are grateful to him. Grandpa took his grandson fishing and into the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, going through the insides of an old car. Andrew suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate Andrew for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. Andrew adored his grandfather and as a child dreamed of being like him. When Andrew was about 6 years old, he first saw a famous rock band on TV, and the boy was so mesmerized by the spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with a plastic shovel. He held it in the manner of a guitar and sang, and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Andrew would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first, the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has an ear and voice and took him to music school. Within these walls, Andrew was disappointed, because he had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the boy sat down at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Andrew hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. Like grandmother, always soft and pliable, suddenly showed firmness. She intended to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured the woman that the boy has talent and Andrew's sense of rhythm is innate. It turned out that Andrew's ear is marvelous, but laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. Grandmother did not want to ruin Andrew's talent, so she forced him for 3 years to go to the hated music school. And then the boy still rambled and, not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted it for a long time about his behavior. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on the posters decorating the city about the arrival of the great pianist. But this was not the scene Andrew had dreamed of. Grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real beautiful guitar for the new year. And Andrew somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies. Something looked at his favorite performers, to something himself reached, and he practiced diligently with a self-study book. Without many-weight, such studies. Without many-weighted instruction, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room choosing compositions, and it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. "We've got a bear in our family. This one's a talent. You can see it in him." Andrew liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the rock stars popular at the time. And he found it, managed to find it. Once at school, Andrew studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother initially dreamed that Andrew will follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear that the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way, and the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that Andrew would become an economics student. Why? The profession is promising, monetary, the very thing for a guy. Andrew didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. An economist is an economist sounds kind of good. It's better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to Andrew something like an endless holiday, a party, new friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. Andrew liked it at university. There seemed to be less control at once. It seemed that all the relatives suddenly recognized the only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. Beautiful. Everything was exactly as Andrew had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. Andrew, guitarist, was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls began to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, Andrew was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at the university suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. Once, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by Andrew was in a rock bar. The guy did not realize that in his town there is such an institution. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a real treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians on the walls, a long counter with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the rooms. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition. Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single, coherent organism. Andrew immediately wanted to become a part of it. This was the very element he dreamed of immersing himself in. From that moment on, Andrew became a frequent guest of the bar. He, catching his breath, watched the musicians' performances and then applauded them, making his palms literally burn with zeal. Together with everyone, the guy sang along with the performers, sometimes even allowed himself to dance, depending on the mood and atmosphere. Gradually, Andrew became like a native in the bar. He made friends with the musicians, and sometimes he was even invited on stage to perform between numbers. Playing for the customers, Andrew felt a back wave of energy from the audience. He liked it incredibly much. The guy aspired to become part of some musical group. After all, by this time, he had already had time to get acquainted with a considerable number of local performers. Performing concerts as part of a rock band had been his dream since childhood. But there were no offers of cooperation, and when Andrew himself tried to offer his services, he was always very politely and tactfully declined so as not to hurt his feelings. It seems that Andrew lacked some defining quality to realize his dream. Perhaps charisma, talent, or all at once. He had to accept the situation. But the musicians of the bar were still idols in his eyes, unattainable heights. He liked to be among them, to listen to their conversations, to help with preparation for performances. And it was in this bar that he met Alex. Andrew still remembered that evening, the last days of May, the time of university credits. As always, he was struggling because of his carelessness. During the whole semester, he neglected his studies, and on the eve of the session, he urgently began to try to catch up, to teach, to pay for retakes, and even to work off some debts. The teacher, economic theory, agreed to give admission to the session to careless students in exchange for the repair of his classroom. Andrew single-handedly spent an entire day doing this work. The unaccustomed physical labor left him with aching legs and back. But the credit book now bore the precious, much-needed instructor's signature. After a hard day, Andrew decided to relax in his favorite rock bar. He went there finding himself alone. All his friends were busy. Someone went on a date because it was Friday. Someone was studying hard for a test, but Andrew wasn't upset. He had a lot of acquaintances at the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. No sooner had Andrew crossed the threshold than he was greeted by Ben, a familiar regular. He and a couple of friends occupied a corner table in the so-called sand room. Andrew gladly joined them, whilst the evening in the company of friends promised to be rich. Talking, joking, exploring the depths of life. However, everything changed with the appearance of Alex in the hall. A short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform. Black short shorts, the same black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail, and her face was adorned with a minimum of makeup. Indeed, she didn't need it. Black, widely spaced eyebrows, long eyelashes of the same color, peachy skin, and eyes of an unimaginable light turquoise color. It was this unusual combination of colors that caught Andrew's attention. "That's the new waitress. Just started yesterday," Ben mumbled, noticing Andrew's gaze. "Cute, I agree." Andrew nodded absent-mindedly. All his thoughts turned to the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what it was about her that had caught his eye. Yes, she was pretty, but he had met prettier girls. Some might say that she was too thin, as they say there's nothing to fight with. But Andrew didn't care about that. His eyes couldn't take his eyes off her. He couldn't tear himself away from her smile. It was radiant, yet humble, imbued with warmth. That smile lit up her face, making it even more attractive. It seemed to Andrew that he wanted to see that smile always. Moreover, he longed to be the one who caused it. He had never had that feeling before. That night, Andrew didn't find the courage to talk to the girl. It was not like him, because lately, the guy had been actively socializing and making new acquaintances. At school, he was really withdrawn and uncommunicative, but with the passage of time, everything changed. Now he had a pretty good experience in socializing. Still, when he was around a new waitress, he felt insecure again and became unusually quiet. One day, Andrew gathered all his courage and came to the bar with the sole purpose of talking to Alex. That night he came alone, without his friends, to whom he had taken himself to indulge in a quick state of economy class. Alex seemed tired or sad. At that moment, one of the visitors, not a regular guest but a casual passerby, expressed his displeasure. He complained that Alex had brought the wrong beer he had ordered, which caused him to complain loudly. The guest insisted on his own, refusing to accept the drink he ordered. In this situation, Alex looked confused. After all, she was now to return the drink, which was certainly unpleasant to admit in front of the receptionist. "When lady, put that beer on my tab." Andrew stepped in, to Alex's relief. "And for this young man, bring what he ordered and paid for." Alex gave Andrew a grateful smile that warmed his heart. He was happy to help the girl and support her in some way. That evening, although they couldn't talk much because of the influx of guests, Andrew and Alex exchanged jokes and smiles. Something special was brewing between them, and the guy could feel it. Alex was not indifferent to Andrew either, and it was adorable. Unfortunately, the hectic work on the weekend left no time for talking because the waitress was too busy. When the end of the shift came, Andrew waited for Alex and offered to walk her home. It turned out that she lived only a couple of blocks away from the bar. The young people, holding hands, walked slowly through the busy city streets. They felt happy and peaceful at this quiet evening hour. They were silent at first, and it was not a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Alex nor Andrew felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then, suddenly, both of them started talking. At first, they discussed the previous evening and the performance of a local rock band, which consisted of high school graduates. Alex and Andrew agreed that the young musicians had everything ahead of them if they continued in the same vein. Finally, Andrew ventured into a more personal conversation. "Do you have someone?" he asked. "No, I'm single." Alex answered quickly. "And you?" Andrew couldn't answer this question unequivocally. He always had meetings, and now he, you could say, was dating a girl from the parallel group. A few dates had already taken place, but for Alex's sake, he wouldn't hesitate to give up all of them. Andrew was more and more attracted to this girl. "Tell me about yourself, please," he asked. "I want to get to know you better." For Andrew, it was a period of unknown sensations. He was happy and confused at the same time. Alex told about her life simply and sincerely. The manner of her speech, the calm and gentle timbre of her voice, the expression of her face, all this attracted Andrew incredibly. He liked everything about her, absolutely everything. It turned out that Alex was born and grew up in a village, almost 100 kilometers away from here. This cozy and quiet corner was not at all adapted to the life of young people. After finishing 9 grades, Alex went to the nearest city for she entered a teacher's college. The choice of the profession of a teacher of junior classes happened not by the call of the heart, but because of the need to make a choice. After receiving her diploma, she tried to get a job in her specialty, but after a few months she realized pedagogy is not her way. Alex shared her memories. I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays, although I can do it all perfectly well. But I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It's one thing to study in college and another to practice. It's heaven and earth. Alex didn't want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children down, to discourage them from learning. So she quit. She then worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail, and I always liked to take care of the kids myself. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. Alex found herself on the street. So I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar. So I answered it. "I'm so glad your center closed," Andrew admitted. "Because if it hadn't, we never would have met." Andrew and Alex began dating. Quiet, modest Alex with a dazzling smile and short stare finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, Andrew saw, felt, sensed it. Alex loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make Egior feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. Andrew moved into Alex's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. Andrew's relatives were not too happy with this fact, but what could they do? Andrew was already a very mature guy. What he wants to do, he does. Andrew was finishing his studies at the university. Alex was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives made it so that there was enough money for the young people. Andrew next to Alex rested his soul. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing in them, paradoxically, pluses. What eyes did Lyra look at him with what attention she caught his every word, and how many compliments Igor received when he played for his girlfriend on the guitar and sang to her. Next to Alex, Andrew felt like someone incredibly necessary, important, successful, almost perfect. It was very pleasant. And then Andrew didn't understand why. Everything started to change. Not all at once, but slowly, gradually. At first, Alex's care stopped warming his soul. Andrew somehow got used to her adoration, and Alex made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And somehow it happened that the guy started to take it all as a norm. Alex didn't evoke the same feelings in him anymore. Admiration, interest, all of that disappeared. At first, Alex seemed a mystery to Andrew, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But her eyes gave away her bright nature. It's an exciting combination. But in time, the guy found out that there was nothing so special about Alex, an ordinary girl, even boring a little. Andrew, on the other hand, has always been attracted to extraordinary personalities. He was afraid of mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Samuel. He was about 10 years older than Andrew. By the way, Samuel had graduated from the same school Andrew had gone to. But to go to vocational school, where the road lay the road of most third graders in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There Samuel made a dizzying career. No, he didn't become a star of the first magnitude, but he still gained a certain fame. His rock band songs were played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts all over the country and even had their own army of fans. Samuel possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. Andrew knew him personally. Samuel often came to their town because his parents lived here, and every time he went to the rock bar, where he was always a favorite guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Everyone here knew Samuel and loved him. Andrew considered himself a fan. He liked everything about the man. The open smile, the way he talked, the steady gaze. Samuel had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. He seemed to see through everyone he talked to with those eyes. Andrew wanted to be like Samuel. He even tried to imitate him, but he quickly realized that he couldn't do it. Samuel was a unique product, a star, a soloist, a leader. That night, Andrew went into the bar where Alex worked to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of acquaintances, the newcomers showed great promise. The evening went on as usual, and close to midnight, Andrew felt some excitement in the... When he turned around, he saw them, Samuel and his buddies. Samuel was heading to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. Andrew rejoiced. What luck! It looked like there would be no boredom today. Samuel was a man of celebration. Andrew decided that he would talk to Samuel today, secretly. In the back of his mind, Andrew still cherished the hope that one day Samuel would help him with his career, introduce him to the right people, and maybe even invite him to his band, at least as a backup, not as a core member. Samuel was living the life Andrew dreamed of. Touring, performing, rehearsing, partying, socializing with interesting people, beautiful girls, and, most importantly, the stage. Samuel literally gathered stadiums, excited crowds of people. Thousands of throats were singing along to him, and all eyes were fixed on him admiringly. If that's not happiness, what is? As Andrew finished his final year of university, it was as if he realized that he was no rock musician, that it might be too late to start. But every meeting with Samuel awakened his dream, gave him food for thought and a tiny ray of hope. Samuel was a risk-taker. After high school, he didn't continue his studies, but risked everything to pursue a career in music. And he'd been successful. Andrew sometimes wished he had been brave enough to take such a step. When Alex was serving Samuel's table, she smiled at him just like all the other customers. But Andrew's eyes were now fixed on his idol, full of hesitation and unspoken aspirations. He looked at her and occasionally said a word or two to the girl. Andrew didn't hear these phrases, but judging by the expression on Alex's face, it was something pleasant. Andrew, to his surprise, suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend chatting nicely with Samuel, and this was clearly not about jealousy. Andrew realized that Samuel was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want a country girl, Alex? Yes, he did. Now that Andrew had lived with her for a few months, he could see that. There was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't understand why he was attracted to her. Andrew was uncomfortable with the fact that he was not the one chatting sweetly with the star. He had to wait patiently for a convenient moment, while Alex was calmly talking to Samuel right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she didn't realize who was in front of her. Or maybe she really didn't. A few more hours passed. Andrew decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Alex rushed to Samuel with an order, and this collision inevitably happened to Andrew. No, Alex held the beer glasses. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation, but Andrew still couldn't resist an irritated remark. An elephant in a china shop. This expression flew out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail him out with when he dropped or broke something. Alex was embarrassed. She was uncomfortable that Andrew was emphasizing the attention of those present on her blunder. If it weren't for his caustic remarks, perhaps no one would have noticed anything. Well, why would you do that? Samuel intervened, smiling encouragingly at Alex. What kind of elephant is it? It's a very sweet and fragile young lady. Andrew looked angrily at Alex. After these words of Samuel, she suddenly became even more annoyed with him. The girl, sensing this, backed off. The rest of the evening went great. Andrew had a great time in the company of Samuel and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What a lot of trouble they got into in their time. You could make a whole movie. Andrew liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Alex's shift was over. She walked over to Andrew, calling him home. Usually they always came back from the bar together. He just waved her off. He couldn't be bothered with her right now. Is that your girlfriend? Samuel asked her. More like an admirer, Andrew said, not caring a bit about Alex's feelings. She was standing right next to him, and she'd heard everything. But the guy didn't care about that. He didn't want Sokolovsky to find out that Andrew was in a serious relationship with a waitress. You're lucky. I wish I had a groupie like you, Samuel said, winking at Alex. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Andrew showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Alex for months. Early in the morning, he thought that Alex would give him a scandal, or at least demand an explanation. He behaved with her very ugly. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to others that she was his girlfriend. But Alex herself looked guilty. She didn't say a word to Andrew. And then, when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. She looked at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and cared for him the same way. Alex's admiration and attention, which before were perceived as a gift of fate, now irritated and seemed to be the girl's advantages recently turned into her disadvantages. Care into obsession, unnatural beauty into rustic simplicity, modesty into stiffness. And yet Andrew was in no hurry to part with Alex. He was comfortable with her. Alex provided him with lodging, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And at the same time, she didn't control every step of the guy as his relatives did, for example. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his brains out with talk about the future. With her, Andrew lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But Andrew dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established guy, next to whom a bright girl with a model appearance, not Alex from the village. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university to finally move to a big city and start a new life in the future. He didn't see Alex around him. She was just a way station for him, nothing more. But Andrew's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. "We need to have a serious talk." These were the words Alex once met Andrew from the university. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Accordingly, he had neither strength nor desire to communicate with the girl. "Okay," Andrew sighed. He realized that he had no way out. I'm expecting a baby," Alex bribed with a look. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. Andrew felt like he'd been doused with a bucket of cold water. "What do you mean?" "I don't understand." "What's there to understand?" "It's simple. I'm expecting a baby. Are you sure about that?" Andrew asked with hope in his voice. "I can't be more certain." "That's a twist." What about New York? What about Andrew's plans and dreams? Now it was all over. Andrew tried to talk Alex into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're just kids. "I'm not ready," the boy honestly admitted. "What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet." "I understand everything," Alex sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry. The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? Andrew knew perfectly well that Lyra couldn't handle it. He also knew that he wouldn't leave her now, or rather, he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known about his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. His grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into Andrew's head a simple rule. You cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It's the gravest sin a man can commit. And now Andrew finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his father, Andrew will not be able to dissolve in the vast expanse of his homeland, and he will not escape the consequences. No, of course, Alex won't go after him. She's not lying when she says that she's going to raise the child, but Andrew's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. "Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding." Andrew sighed and squeezed out a semblance of a smile. "Well, now we can't keep water in a sieve. We'll have to adapt to new circumstances." If you think about it, Alex wasn't the only one to blame for the situation. He, Andrew, had a part in it. Alex, of course, is not the limit of his dreams, but it is possible to live with her. She's economical, quiet, caring. Probably a good mother, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. Andrew's gonna get his way. The boy honestly tried to console himself with these thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce. And realize the old plans. You'll have to pay alimony for 18 years. But that's no problem. Andrew will have such an income that these mandatory deductions will not do him any good. Alex put her arms around Andrew, pressed herself against him. "I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted." Earlier such words filled Andrew with energy and joy. But now, hearing them from Alex, the guy felt only heaviness. Instead of being happy about her trust, Andrew felt as if he had an anchor tied to his leg. He remained silent. Andrew introduced Alex to the in-laws. It was inevitable because of the upcoming wedding. Alex easily won their hearts, especially her grandmother, who never tired of repeating that Andrew was extremely lucky. But the more people around him rejoiced at the upcoming event, the more he felt trapped. Both his dreams and plans for a new life somewhere far away from here seemed shattered. All because of Alex, because of this unexpected pregnancy, and imminent wedding, now that he had finally received his cherished diploma instead of striving for new horizons. He found himself bound by circumstances here in this small town. Alex was still working at the bar, and Andrew had decided to take a short vacation after his studies. He knew he had the responsibility of supporting a family ahead of him when Alex went on maternity leave. He reasoned that he was entitled to a short break before a new phase in his life. At the rock bar, where he now spent more and more time with friends, Andrew looked enviously at the young musicians. He realized that many of them could stay in this forgotten town forever, and some, like Samuel, had great futures ahead of them. Watching them, Andrew realized that he could have done things differently with his life. A man only lives once, and he doesn't have time for unloved causes and people. But commitment seemed to hold him captive like a snare. In the back of his mind, he wanted to scream in despair, seeing his prospects in life not working out the way he wanted it to. But his friends did not guess anything. Andrew skillfully hid his true feelings. They thought the guy was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's normal. Andrew didn't try to change their minds, suffering alone and desperately hoping that things could still catch up, not now, later, in a couple years. His plans weren't overridden, just put on hold for the time being, as long as this swamp doesn't swallow it up. It was on one of those nights at the bar, when Alex stayed home and Andrew enjoyed some freedom, that he met Scarlet. Tall, dazzlingly beautiful, long hair falling in waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing her flat stomach. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were also pretty girls, but all their virtues paled against Jean's beauty. Andrew hadn't taken his eyes off her since she appeared in the hall. He was not the only one, by the way. His friends had already left, but Andrew was still sitting at the table, drinking beer and watching. He liked everything about her. Her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Scarlet was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general in life, it seems. The girl caught Andrew's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already left by that time. 2 silent girls remained, who did not interfere with the conversation between Scarlet and Andrew.
In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young men had much in common. Scarlet was a couple years younger than Andrew and had also been raised without a father. Grandmother and mother insisted that the girl after school entered the law school of the local university, and Scarlet herself, as long as she can remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life.
"You're really going to be a great actress," Andrew assured the new acquaintance sincerely. "With that kind of appearance, terrific. You'll have directors fighting over you." "Thank you." Scarlet smiled without the slightest embarrassment. "I think so too. But I wasn't ready to argue with my mom and grandma at that age. Not like now." Scarlet had listened to her older female relatives at first, and then as she grew older and stronger, she declared that she was an adult and would no longer allow herself to be manipulated and in charge of her own life. "Anyway, today I picked up my documents from uni. I'm not going back there again. In a couple of days, the train, and I'll leave for New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here again." Andrew looked admiringly at the girl. How wonderful she is. Scarlet, unlike him, didn't betray her dream despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to drop out of college and go to Newark into the unknown. She's like Samuel in that way, and Scarlet is bound to win. With that kind of looks, character, and assertiveness next to this girl, Andrew suddenly thought himself worthless and cowardly. But this unpleasant feeling did not last long because Scarlet suddenly kissed Andrew. Andrew was dizzy with surprise. Is this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him?
"You're awesome," Andrew informed Scarlet, pulling her slightly away. Huge brown eyes resembled 2 dark eyes. Someone could so easily drown in them.
"Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. It feels like you're cramped in this city too. It'll be easier on the 2 of us." Andrew was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful interlocutor. She sensed him so subtly, knew everything about him at once. "That's amazing." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "I'm with you." The moment Andrew said it, he genuinely thought he'd deal with problems like Alex and the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Andrew might never meet another girl like her again. Probably never, because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, Andrew left the rock bar with Scarlet. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Scarlet drove the car delightfully, beautifully. Andrew admired her confident movements and slim profile all the way. And now they were outside the city, in some deserted field, a deserted place. Scarlet stopped the engine, turned to Andrew and smiled. How could they resist? They met the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the sprawled-out seats. But that moment Andrew had no doubt. He would break up with Alex. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would definitely be no wedding. Telling Alex the truth wasn't easy at all, but Andrew wasn't going to cheat either. Why is that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. That's just the way it happens. Andrew isn't Alex's property. He's a free man who's free to do with his life as he pleases. But Alex looked at Andrew with eyes that held hope, adoration, love, and tenderness. Looking into those devoted eyes, it was hard to tell the truth. Andrew felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he directly shared the news with his ex-fiancée. Alex, it's like she passed away, as if Andrew's words had caused her physical pain. Tears came to her eyes. Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Scarlet at all, do you? Beautiful girl, you're young. I can understand it all. A fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway. Andrew felt anger boiling up inside him. That woman doesn't understand anything at all. He wants to go to New York to start a new life, the one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. No way he wouldn't have the load of an obsessive Alex, and he certainly didn't need a baby there. Alex cried, begged, apologized. Andrew never realized why. The guy was angry, insulted the girl, trying to hurt her. He realized that he was being cruel to Alex, but angry words were his way to break the connection with the annoying girl, to turn her away from himself. And so, Andrew found himself on a new round of his life adventures, leaving the familiar world, hopes and perhaps illusions for the dream of a future, which he imagined much brighter and more intense. At the same time, his actions and decisions were not exempt from the guilt and burden of responsibility he felt toward the child. Andrew tried to convince himself that his decision was not an escape, but a step toward finding himself, toward being able to live the life he chose for himself, not the one chosen for him. However, the road to self-discovery and self-realization is rarely easy and cloudless. He had to go through trials and possible loneliness, being away from his familiar surroundings, from the sometimes heartwarming comfort of home, relationships in which, despite conflicts and disappointments, there were moments of sincerity and warmth. And the journey into the unknown with Scarlet was full of expectations and hopes. Common dreams and goals brought them together. But only time would tell if they would be able to pass all the obstacles together, if they would retain the strength and devotion to each other that seemed so obvious and unshakable at the beginning of their journey together. Imagining what will become of his life in a few years is a kind of mental test for Andrew, a test of maturity and the ability to take responsibility not only for his own life, but also for those he leaves behind. Perhaps there will always be a place in his heart of regret for the path he has chosen, and at the same time, pride in the courage to live his own way.
One of the most difficult questions Andrew finds himself facing is how to be a good long-distance father and how to stay connected to his child despite the circumstances. He envisions his future in the big city as a time of great opportunity, but also as a challenge in which he will have to learn how to combine personal aspirations with caring for his loved ones.
Andrew leaves behind not only the past, but also a piece of his heart, with the hope that in time he can find a way to reconnect with its inhabitants without losing himself and his dreams. The grandfather put aside a tidy sum of money for his grandson's account each year. It was, in his opinion, the necessary startup capital for every man. And now, when this money was needed, it came in handy. With this money, Andrew was able to rent an apartment for himself and Scarlet. They lived on it for the first time, while they still had to find a job. His grandfather, grandmother, and mother constantly sought to contact Andrew. They were probably anxious to express their dissatisfaction with his decision. It seemed to them that they could somehow influence the situation, maybe even force him to return home. However, the young man ignored these attempts at communication. He explained everything to his relatives in a letter and preferred not to have any conversations with them until they were calmer. Time will sort things out. After I get a job and get settled, I'll have a chance to do something nice for them. We'll talk then, Andrew reasoned. Scarlet thought Andrew was doing the right thing. Often parents and relatives, without even realizing it, put obstacles in our way. They try to force us to live according to their ideas, to conform us to their expectations. But we are not their property. Each of us has the right to make our own lives. Andrew fully supported Scarlet's every word. Unfortunately, their relationship didn't last long. Soon Scarlet found a rich sponsor in the capital and immediately left Andrew for him. Such a betrayal caused Andrew great pain. He was sure that he had found his only one who understood him like no one else. It seemed to him that together they could overcome all difficulties. But that's not what happened. Nevertheless, it was impossible to give up. It was necessary to take measures to settle in a new place and find a better paid job. Coming back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searching, Andrew finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in a company that, although not particularly successful, had stability. The guy took it as the start of his way to a successful and prosperous life. However, more than 10 years have passed, and there were no significant changes. Andrew still occupied not the most prestigious position and practically did not move up the career ladder. Prospects seemed rather dim. Nevertheless, when he got the job, he still called his mother, ready for a serious conversation. He expected reproaches and possible demands to return, but his mother's reaction was unexpected. She wondered how he could have done this, not only to them, but to Alex. His relations were predictable, but his mother's next words shocked Andrew. Alex was so distraught over the alleged betrayal that she lost her baby, ended up in the hospital. She was barely saved, and then Andrew learned that calls had been made to inform him of Alex's condition, but he had never answered. This news stunned him. Despite everything, learning about the loss of his child did not make him feel relieved. On the contrary, it triggered a painful mixture of feelings: disappointment, pain, and longing.
Strangely enough, Andrew was able to get through it. Now it seemed to him that it was even easier to turn the page and start life anew. Andrew worked hard, saving money. His life was full of reports and traveling from the office to home. He had no time for entertainment, new acquaintances, and even less for relationships with girls. The guitar, which he once loved, was now covered in dust in the corner, as there was no time to play, and most importantly, no desire.
After a couple of years, Andrew managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house, in a remote area, without repairs, but his own. Relatives helped with the down payment. The guy sincerely rejoiced at this achievement, believing that the beginning has been made. But again, time passed and nothing changed. Andrew lived in a tiny 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work, pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully created the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. Andrew knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. Andrew's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling, but these ladies were all the same. They were from out of town like Scarlet. They needed a place to stay for a while. Andrew's apartment was used as a staging post. The man was well aware of that, and now he remembered Alex with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, Andrew felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they were always just using Andrew. The man understood this perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Then, in his youth, Andrew thought that he would have many more like Alex. Only with the years he realized that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships, a great rarity, but nothing could be taken back. Andrew was very happy to receive a call from his old friend Kevin. They had been together since high school and until Andrew left for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things. Warm memories, shared childhood and youth. All this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Kevin has decided to settle down after all. He is about to have a wedding, and he invites to the celebration of a childhood friend who now lives in New York. But Will the Muscovite in his busy schedule will find time for an old friend. It's been ages since we've seen each other, and this is the occasion, Kevin said. This half-joking phrase has once again convinced Andrew that he is considered quite an accomplished and happy man.
The social media activity was not in vain. Andrew had never visited his hometown in all those years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather came to visit him several times. And Andrew, for some reason, he didn't feel like going, but now the situation had changed.
The man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends, for whom he is a successful economist from the capital, to walk along the streets familiar from childhood, to look into a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but a capital guest who managed to get out of the wilderness. "Of course I will, Kevin," he thought. Andrew arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab, but decided to walk. Not much had changed here. The same dusty stretches of highway, the same sidewalks, the same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares surrounded him everywhere. A strange feeling swept over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like the others. The others would stay in town, but he, Andrew, would become someone great like Samuel. A man the locals would be proud to know. But not everything works out the way he wanted. Sure, Andrew lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, Andrew will be able to feel like the person he wanted to be when he was young, he thought. And that made him happy. The family greeted their son and grandson joyfully and warmly. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather had become quite old, and once they had seemed energetic and all-powerful to Andrew. Time spares no one, and Mom was not the beautiful and young woman she used to be. Andrew felt sad at the thought that they were the only people on the entire planet who cared about him. He didn't even want to think about the days when they would be gone and he would be all alone. The next day, Andrew met Kevin and his fiancée at a cafe. Emma turned out to be a very pretty and pleasant woman. Kevin didn't let go of her hand. It was obvious that the friend was in love with his companion with all his heart. Under Emma's blouse, he could see a neat tummy. So that's it. Kevin is going to be a father soon. That's news, Andrew thought. He reflected on the fact that he'd have a teenage child by now if it weren't for, who knows, maybe if that baby had been born, Andrew would have come back from New York to him when he realized things weren't working out in the capital. Maybe he would have proposed to Alex and they would all have been together, living a big and friendly family. I wish I had realized then in my youth. Here it is. Happiness itself came into my hands, and I kept chasing the mythical crane in the sky. The friendly reunion went great. Andrew and Kevin were joined by their old buddies. They sat and discussed the details of their upcoming wedding and laughed a lot, just like when they were kids and young adults. Andrew's friends were all married, solid men. Some had grown a belly, some were beginning to gray. Grown family men, all just as fun as they used to be. Then Kevin and Emma went home, and Andrew and his friends went to an almost native rock bar. Here, to the man's relief, almost nothing had changed either. The buddies came in here periodically. They still remained their own here, which was very warming to the soul. Andrew diligently played the role of a successful Muscovite, treating his buddies to a beer and telling them about his life. He didn't lie, of course, but he presented the facts in such a way as to preserve the image of a man who had managed to realize the dream of his youth. "Well done, Andrew," declared the friend, clapping the man on the shoulder. "As he always said, when you were young, you'll achieve more. And here you have done it. We're all even a little jealous of you here." Andrew smiled at his friend and remained silent. If he knew exactly what he was jealous of, the next day was the wedding. Andrew arrived at the appointed time. A crowd of dressed-up guests, the newlyweds' adult relatives, and their friends all gathered together. Andrew was even at first confused by such an abundance of strangers. Then his friends called him. All of them came to the party with their other halves. Family, serious people. They all had kids, jobs, apartments, cars, looking at his old friends, standing on the arm with their wives. Andrew once again felt that his life was passing aimlessly. Solemn registration, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, showered the newlyweds with compliments. Kevin and Emma really looked beautiful in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. Andrew had relaxed by then and was getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asking about New York, talking respectfully about Andrew's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. In the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the host of the evening, a cheerful, smiling guy. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. This is where Andrew got a surprise he couldn't have imagined. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Alex. At first, the man couldn't even believe his eyes. "I thought I was imagining things. But why would she be here in the first place?" Alex had changed, of course, during this time, but not so much that Andrew didn't recognize her. The same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Alex's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Alex was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald shade, which suited her eyes so well. Her hair was beautifully pinned up in a way that revealed her beautiful face and spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. Andrew could feel it even from a distance. "Is that Alex?" Andrew turned to his buddy standing next to him. "What's she doing here?" "Alex. Kevin invited her," the buddy replied. Andrew grinned. He wasn't very helpful.
At that moment, Alex noticed him too. Their eyes met, and Alex smiled. That beaming smile had a strange effect on Andrew.
How could he forget this radiant, warm smile, illuminating her face with some special light? But, on the other hand, anger suddenly rose in his soul. For some unknown reason, he suddenly made her Alex, the culprit of his not-so-successful life. Alex, years ago, was just plain obsessive. She was annoying, demanding his attention, and unwilling to give him any freedom. It was from her that he had decided to leave for New York before he was fully ready to do so. Now he's decided it's all her fault. And now Andrew was forced to live a miserable existence, and Alex came to the wedding. So beautiful, successful, and confident, smiling at him with a sense of superiority. Andrew nodded dryly to Alex and hurried to disappear into the crowd. The festivities were not so pleasant now. From his seat, Andrew watched Alex having fun, easily talking to the guests, laughing and dancing. She apparently knew many people here, and them were asking her to dance. The young lady was undoubtedly a success. Strangely, she'd come to the wedding alone. Kevin invited her. Why would that be? Andrew's thoughts tried to find an explanation. From afar, it seemed to him that Alex's life had turned out well. She wore seemingly modest jewelry, inconspicuous earrings, and a thin necklace. But he was well aware of how much it cost. A fortune. The same could be said about the shoes, from a famous brand with a signature red sole. Alex didn't look like a resident of their town at all. She looked modest, but expensive and refined. Unlike the local ladies who liked to show themselves in all their glory for celebrations like weddings. Bright makeup, ostentatious clothes, elaborate hair, Alex stood out against their background, and it pissed Andrew off. It seemed to him that Alex looked at everyone from the level of his superiority, including him. Andrew wanted to bring Alex down to earth, showing her arrogance, and show her who she really was. A simple girl from the village, a former waitress, whom he had left years ago, not wanting to connect his life with a girl from the countryside. It seemed to him that he shouldn't act like an unchangeable queen here. After all, at this wedding, the couple's guest was him, Andrew, not her. He'd been waiting for the right moment. And now, at last, the moment had come. Alex took the tray and hurried to an elderly woman, apparently the bride's grandmother, who felt ill from the heat. Noticing this, Alex quickly went to the kitchen and returned with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Andrew hurried to meet his ex-fiancée, full of intentions to humiliate her. In his head, he had already formed a suitable phrase. Nay, hello. The past just wouldn't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. He was counting on those words to remind Alex of her past and who she really was. Alex looked up at Andrew with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused, and that was it. So much for the glossy exterior, Andrew thought. Alex hasn't changed a bit, and I still seem to be a huge influence on her. Just like before. Hello to you too, Alex said quietly, putting the tray in front of the old woman and stepping aside. Andrew, satisfied with himself, returned to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had managed to hurt Alex. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant in his eyes anymore, and that was great. Andrew decided to ask a young girl to dance, Emma's niece, I think. This girl had been sending him loving glances all evening, fascinated by the supposedly successful capital city guest. Andrew decided to capitalize on this impression and asked her to dance. She happily accepted. Andrew did it for Alex. Let her see how much fun he's having and how popular he is. Even the young beauties are throwing themselves around his neck. It seems that Andrew achieved the desired effect. Alex looked at him dancing with the young cousin of the bride, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for Andrew. It was pleasant for Andrew to think so, but it wasn't enough for him. He wanted the people around him to laugh at Alex, though he couldn't understand why he wanted to do that. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Andrew secretly watched Alex, waiting for the right moment.
And that moment came. Someone spilled champagne on the floor, and Alex, not noticing the puddle, slipped, waving her hands. Almost falling, she grabbed the column at the last moment, miraculously keeping her balance. Someone suppressed an exclamation. Someone grinned. And Andrew said aloud,
"Man, well, you were an elephant in a china shop, and you still are." "Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again?" A familiar voice suddenly sounded. Andrew shifted his gaze from Alex to the man who had appeared behind her back and saw Samuel in front of him. He had come into the restaurant unnoticed, probably only a couple minutes ago. Samuel, without taking his eyes off Andrew, walked over to Alex, helped her up, and put his arm around her waist. There was sadness on Alex's face. "That elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then? Remember?" Samuel continued. Andrew nodded, though he couldn't recall that moment. "It was with that phrase of yours that my introduction to this wonderful girl began," Samuel said, smiling at Alex. "So, my many thanks to you. But don't say that to her again, or you'll have to deal with me." Samuel seemed to be joking. He was smiling as he said the phrase, but his eyes were dead serious. Stunned, Andrew returned to his seat. His lady, Emma's young cousin, sat down next to him and started chattering excitedly. Andrew didn't care for her. He was looking at Samuel, who was very gently supporting Alex by the hand. A crowd immediately gathered around them. Kevin was there too. Old acquaintances were drinking, joking, discussing something cheerfully. And Andrew couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. But he was too stunned, too lost. "What was going on here?" "I don't understand," he said at last. "What's Samuel doing here?" "These are Kevin's buddies. Kevin's known him since he was a kid. He's his idol," Andrew's young companion said. "Well, she was helpful. Surely this girl could give him some information." And Emma's cousin gladly told all she knew. It turns out that Samuel, who has already made quite a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who did not want to leave their small homeland, but also friends, of course. Samuel all this time continued to communicate with Kevin and his buddies. They often met at the rock bar. Andrew would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. So gradually, they all developed an almost friendly relationship. Alex. He met her at the same rock bar. They say that she was insulted by some guy right in front of Samuel. Well, the girl shared the details. And it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her right away. Samuel fell in love with her, even wrote a lot of songs for her. In my opinion, these songs of his, which are for Alex, are the most beautiful. But Alex, I think she was in love with someone else at the time. She had some kind of unhappy love affair. Weird. Who could resist Samuel? This one was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He was said to have done her a bad turn, left her before the wedding, I think. So she was in a terrible state at the time. Emma said Alex was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but Andrew did. He knew why Alex was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She'd lost her baby, their baby. Kevin and Emma told me. Alex didn't go back to work at the rock bar. She went to her family in the country, and Samuel found her, got her address from some people he knew and went. Samuel himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Andrew was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Samuel goes to a rock bar every night hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Alex from mutual acquaintances. Kevin and the other buddies all knew, of course, that Andrew had dumped Alex before the wedding and left for New York. The guys, they understood the friend, especially since he wasn't going to give up the baby, and even supported him. Approve of the deed. Well, anyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Kevin said in a deep voice when he heard Andrew was leaving. Samuel saved Alex, pulled her out of the depths of despair. He was there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Samuel came to her village every day. Every time, he'd pour himself out in a lovely way. Young Alex, say she, it's strange, but she didn't want to be with him. How is that possible? I can't imagine. Such a man. And she must have loved the old one, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Samuel kept visiting her. It's so romantic. And of course, Alex melted. And they've been together ever since. What? They got married. Andrew saw a press report about Samuel's wedding, but there were no pictures of it online. And Samuel preferred to keep his private life private. Andrew had no idea that Samuel's wife was Alex. Alex, the woman he'd run away from years ago and still had feelings for. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a big fuss about it. It was a quiet, low-key affair. Then they flew to New York and live there now. They flew here to visit Samuel's parents for a couple days. Kevin found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Alex got here first. Samuel had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Really, they make a great couple. Andrew looked at Samuel and Alex. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Samuel gently put his arm around his spouse's shoulders, and she put her hand on his knee. Idle, they really did look like a harmonious couple and looked simply gorgeous together. Andrew suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Alex and look into her eyes. He was the one who wanted that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Andrew had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He destroyed his happiness years ago with his own hands. And now his reality is he works for pennies, lives alone, no friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom Andrew still sincerely admires, Samuel, considers him a scoundrel. And rightly so, by the way. They have children. Andrew's companion, as if reading his thoughts, completed the picture of Alex's current happy life. She had no idea that Andrew was the cruel bridegroom who left his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, she would hardly have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and the girl are twins. I've even seen them. They're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Andrew felt like a jerk. First, he wanted to make a splash with the people he knew, to come here as some sort of metropolitan visitor. Successful, more accomplished than his small-town friends. At least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he really was.
And Alex. Wanting to humiliate her was pathetic and ridiculous too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood looked silly, to say the least. Andrew couldn't stand being here any longer. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Andrew felt that he was close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing the wall with his fist in the end, or even worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Andrew realized he had to leave, silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Samuel himself was here. It was unlikely that anyone would notice Andrew's disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, 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 to get away from here. I don't care where. It was not a matter of the first importance.
And so Andrew wandered through the night streets. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward the center of town. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends, bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They would start asking Andrew about what had happened. They'd be worried, anxious. No, it's better to be outside by yourself. Andrew will come back later when the family is asleep. The man walked through his hometown, wherever he could see. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete nobody and regretted that he had come to Kevin's wedding. He wished this situation had never happened in the first place. Andrew, wait, I can't catch up with you. A voice came from behind him. The man turned around and it was the same young girl, Emma's cousin, rushing toward him. Andrew didn't even remember her name. What are you doing here? You left so suddenly. I followed you. Your face was strange and very sad, I think. Why did you follow me? Why did you follow me? The man was surprised. Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you. Andrew looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could it be that he, so lowly and mean, could like this young creature? Apparently, the girl is really fascinated by him. Strangely, but it made us so warm. Andrew realized that not all was lost. He's only 35. A whole life is ahead of him, and what kind of life it will be depends only on him. Obviously, the man had made a lot of mistakes, but he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself, in your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing. Now it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at Andrew with hope. In her eyes, he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now, he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what could happen to a young girl on the street at night. Andrew will say something reassuring and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, and he'll leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes, but it's going to work out. It's going to work out. Voices could be heard outside the open kitchen door. AA was quietly coming down the stairs. When she woke up, she was thirsty. The woman was surprised to find that her husband was not in bed with her. The clock showed the 3rd hour of the night. Where could he have gone at such a time? She thought. There was always a jug of clean water on the table next to the bed, but yesterday she forgot to fill it. We'll have to go down to the kitchen. Alien slipped her feet into her slippers and went out into the hallway. Walking down the stairs of their big house, she realized that George was in the kitchen and talking quietly with his mother about something. Her mother-in-law lived with them, but before Alien did not notice that her husband and mother-in-law liked to chat at night. She went quietly to the door. You should have left her a long time ago. Her mother-in-law's voice sounded like the hiss of a cobra. Mom, stop it. I love Alien, George spoke in a whisper. But even with the door ajar, you could hear that he was annoyed. You don't understand, son. I'm taking care of you. I told you right away, don't marry that fool. With your money, with your position, you could have found a better wife. From a normal family. No, Mom. I hate to hear that. George even raised his voice a little. If you remember when I married Alien, I didn't have any position. Well, I'm sorry. At least I raised you all my life. Put my whole soul into you, worked 2 jobs to give you a decent education so that you could choose a better path in life. Thank you. The best thank you for me is my grandson. And you're depriving me of the opportunity to be a grandmother. Mom, you know, Alien and I have tried to have a child many times, but ... In general, if you don't talk to her yourself, file for divorce and kick her out of the house. I will tell Alien everything myself. I will tell you that you have another family. Her mother-in-law's voice sounded resolute, but Alien didn't pay attention to it now. She only heard one thing: another family, another family, another family. The woman almost screamed, her mouth hanging open. She turned around and ran up the stairs to the bedroom. What she heard that night was a terrible discovery for her. If what Anne says is true, then it turns out that George is deceiving her. And how many years does it last? How long has he been living with 2 families? No, it was impossible to believe it. From the first day they met, they loved and cared for each other. And my husband never even offended Alien with a word. Hundreds of small hammers were pounding in his temples. Alien really wanted to wake up. She wanted it all to be some kind of stupid dream, a nightmare that would disappear as soon as she opened her eyes. But it wasn't a dream. She heard her mother-in-law talking to her husband about George having another family. This can't be happening. 10 years ago, Alien and George met at a party, where the girl was invited by her friend Jane. They studied at hairdressing courses together and have already interned at one of the beauty salons. It turned out that her boyfriend's friend, the same George, was throwing a birthday party. It was there that the young people saw each other for the first time. But before that, Jane had been trying to persuade her friend to go to the party for a very long time. There's nothing for me to wear there, sighed Alien. Oh, that's not a problem, Jane smiled, opening the closet. Jane began to take out hangers with dresses, blouses, and skirts from the closet. Choose what you want and can. Then don't even return it, she suggested. Try on the one that suits you best, Jane said, applying the dress to the alien. And this turquoise one with sand will be good for you, Jane claimed, helping her friend try on a dress. Oh, what are you? I hardly wear them, Alien objected, looking at the white high-heeled shoes. Put it on. insisted Jane, putting the shoes in front of her friend. "You look great, alien," Alex said, looking at the girl through the rearview mirror. "I can't wait to drink champagne and dance," Jane supported him. "Well, will we make it?" Jane was indignant as they drove down the street. Alex, the leading car. "Calm down, of course we'll make it, girls." Alien drove and looked out the window at the quiet night area and the lanterns illuminating the dark streets, thinking about how beautiful the city is at night. What awaits her at this party? She didn't know, so she was worried. After taking the elevator to the 10th floor, they immediately heard loud music and cheerful voices. Alex rang the bell next to the front door. No one opened it. "It's no use. No one will hear the bell," he said and pulled the door. It turned out to be open. The trio entered the hallway, and Alien realized that she found herself in some other world unknown to her. It was a very large apartment, well furnished with expensive furniture. Colored lights ran across the ceiling in the living room, and girls and boys danced under them. Noticing the guests, the tall, stately host of the party rushed to them. Finally, the birthday boy hugged his friend. "I thought you weren't coming," Dottie greeted Jane, and she pushed Alien forward. "Let's get acquainted. George. This is an alien. She's my best friend. That's the kind of girl." Jane gave a thumbs up. "Very nice," said the guy, holding out his hand. "I'm George. Come on in, join us. Don't be shy about anything or anyone. In general, open up, guys." Alien noted that the audience at this party is very interesting. The girls in beautiful outfits behaved confidently and easily. They danced and had fun. They were not shy of anyone. The guys supported the girls. There were plates of snacks on the table and even on the windowsills. There were bottles of wine and stronger drinks everywhere. Jane and Alex left Alien, rushing to their friends. They knew almost everyone here. And Alien felt awkward. Suddenly, someone handed her a glass. "Will you have a drink?" It was George. The girl took the glass in her hands. In general, she rarely drank, but then apparently out of excitement she drank wine. It tasted good, moderately sweet, and fruity. "I see you're bored. Why aren't you dancing?" the birthday boy asked. "It's a little awkward." "I don't know anyone here," Alien replied timidly. "Do you want me to introduce you?" "Don't. Inconvenient." "But then look. This girl with long hair is Helen. We studied together. My childhood friend eats something there all the time. We went to the same kindergarten, can you imagine? And we're still friends. Friends are sitting on the couch and girls are lighting up there. Do you remember?" Alien nodded, although she still couldn't remember all the names at once. "Don't be shy. We have a good company, all our own." George served her a canapé with cheese and olives. "I'll try. Can I go out on the balcony to get some air?" the girl asked. "Of course. It's really stuffy in here." He led the alien to a large loggia. From the 10th floor of the high-rise building, there was a wonderful view of the city, shining with lights. A light wind blew, bringing a breath of fresh air. The wine was slightly dizzying. Slow music came from the room. "Come on, let's dance." George extended his hand to the alien. The girl turned around and saw that Jane and Alex were dancing, clinging to each other. For some reason, she also wanted to dance. George turned out to be a gallant, strong guy. He moved very well. Dancing with him, Alien felt more confident among unfamiliar guys. "Where do you study?" the guy asked. "At a hairdressing course," replied Alien. "Will you make people beautiful?" "Something like that." Since childhood, Alien wanted to work in a barber shop like her mother. Therefore, after graduation from the orphanage, there was no choice for her. "And you?" "I'm in my 5th year," George replied, smiling. "I'll be a journalist. All my life I have dreamed of traveling around the country and showing people what is happening in different regions. I want to work in the news." "Great. It's a great profession." Alien supported him. "You're no worse off." George smiled even wider. "Can you imagine if there were no hairdressers, how terrible the correspondence would look on TV?" They laughed. Alien has become so easy with this simple and very attractive guy. After a few hours, the guys began to disperse. Alex called a taxi, leaving his car near George's house. Saying goodbye, the birthday boy asked Aliona for a phone number. "Can I call you sometime?" he asked. "Call me." Alien smiled. She was very tired, but she was glad that her friend was able to persuade her to go to visit. In the taxi, smiling mysteriously, Jane looked at the alien. "But George liked you." She poked her friend lightly in the side. "I haven't left your side all evening." "Stop it. Just a very polite and hospitable host." Alien lowered her eyes because she liked this guy herself. "Oh, a hospitable host. If you want to know, he is also one of the best students in the course, and an enviable groom. By the way, Alex, confirm my words." "Aha, an enviable groom without a bride." The guy laughed. "And this case is fixable." Jane persisted. "Let us take our alien and marry him off." "Oh, that's enough already. There's my house." The girl pointed to her 5-story building to the driver. The friends said goodbye, and Alien headed for the entrance. She was terribly sleepy. "I didn't even have the strength to take a shower." The girl changed her clothes and collapsed on the sofa. Drowning with her head in a soft pillow, Alien slept almost until lunch. When she opened her eyes, the afternoon sun was shining through the curtains. The girl stretched and went to the bathroom. Today she had to go to the courses in the evening, and also have time to buy groceries and cook food. There's almost nothing in the fridge at all. Entering the kitchen, she put the kettle on and took a can of coffee out of the cupboard. It was empty. Coffee would be nice now, but I'll have to drink tea. Alien thought. A phone trilled from the room. "Hello," the girl replied. "Hello, this is George. So I decided to call you to find out how you're doing. How are you feeling?" "Hi, it's all good." For some reason, Aliona's heart began to beat faster. "Let's meet tonight, go out somewhere?" the guy suggested. "I have a course tonight." "That's it. It's agreed. I'll meet you." After the course, the address was sent. Alien did not have time to come to her senses, did not have time to answer something, began to doubt, and George had already said goodbye and hung up. She was standing by the window and did not even notice how a smile was opening on her face. She really wanted to see this confident, grown-up, strong guy again. The girl hardly waited for the end of classes. George was waiting for her at the entrance. She had noticed his figure in the window a long time ago. "Hello," she said, and her heart began to beat very hard. "Hello." He held out his hand to her. "Come on." "Where to?" "I know a good place here. Let's sit down and have a bite. You must be hungry, right?" George was smiling with such a charming smile that the girl couldn't resist. Alien really didn't mind eating something right now. She didn't have time to go shopping. The small cafe with only a few tables was calm and quiet. A few customers were talking quietly, drinking coffee. The soft, calm music was relaxing. "Order whatever you want," the guy suggested when the waitress brought the menu. "And what will you do?" Alien asked. "I see. You're shy." George understood her question in his own way. "Well, then I'll make the order myself. You don't mind?" "Okay." The young man ordered a salad, roast, and dessert for himself and the alien. Watching her eat, George smiled. "I am so pleased that you agreed to meet with me," he said when they had finished dinner and were drinking coffee. "It's strange, it feels like I've known you for many years. And we often sit like this in a cafe," replied Alien. "But I don't really know anything about you at all." "What should I tell you? I was born in this city. I've lived here all my life. My mother raised me alone. Since childhood, she has instilled in me that the subject of my father is taboo. So even before school, I stopped asking her who my dad was. My mother had a hard time alone, but she did everything so that I didn't need anything. I am very grateful to her for that." "And who is your mother?" Alien asked. Now she has her own publishing agency. Oh, I see why you want to become a journalist. I'm already working. My mother often gives me orders for publications so that I have my own money. It teaches you to work, so to speak. I've been writing for her publishing house since the 3rd year. Their cups had been empty for a long time, and there were no people in the cafe anymore. Shall we go? George suggested. They went outside. The warm May breeze was blowing Alina's hair. They walked along the square, enjoying each other's company. She didn't want to go home at all. The girl's soul has not had such calmness and a sense of security for a long time. Well, will you tell me about yourself? George asked. Alien was silent. She didn't know what to tell this confident guy who had everything going so well in his life. He was lucky. At least he had a mother who probably just adores her son, cares about him, loves him with all her soul. Alien couldn't boast of that. In her life, everything was exactly the opposite. That's how the world works. Fate is not kind to everyone. She has been singling out someone since childhood, and there is no explanation why this is happening. My mother was a hairdresser, the girl began to tell about herself. Well, then I also understand why you chose this profession. Did you follow in your mom's footsteps? Yes, she has been gone for many years. She died. I'm sorry. And the father? Alien didn't want to continue this topic at all. She had long ago taught herself not to remember her childhood. Her father drank, sometimes raised his hand against her mother, but she loved him very much. Despite her young age, the girl still remembered some of the scenes that frightened her as a child. She was forced to huddle in a corner, hide behind a closet or under a table. One day he got drunk, and a man died in a fight because of him. That's how he ended up in prison. He died of grief there. The mother has now started drinking alcohol. She often left her 5-year-old daughter alone at home for a few days, going on a spree. The woman was kicked out of work. At the barber shop, her hands often shook, and customers complained about the smell of fumes. Seeing all this, the neighbors called the Social Security staff, and after a while the mother was deprived of parental rights. After that, the mother was completely drunk. From a beautiful, blooming, and always well-groomed woman, she turned into a monster. The booze ruined her, and one day the neighbors found the girl's mother dead in her apartment. The grandmother took custody of the girl and took her to herself. But by the time Alien had to go to 1st grade, Grandma died of a heart attack. That's how Alien got into an orphanage. The girl did not want to tell all this to a guy who was doing well in his life, and who liked her so much. Other people's problems and failures, even if they do not depend on us, are not needed by anyone. So she kept quiet for a bit and decided to lie. I never knew him either. I see. You and I are friends in misfortune, it turns out. George wanted to defuse the situation. He saw that the conversation he started went in the wrong direction, made Alien sad, and he didn't want to spoil the evening. But the girl was already immersed in the memories that she had so diligently banished from her head. She was almost good at it. Only George brought her back to the past. 2 years ago, she left the orphanage. The girl was lucky. Very quickly she was given an apartment, like an orphan. Some savings in the account helped the girl at first, and everything seemed to be fine. But something happened that made her look at the world with different eyes and realize that it was not as kind and warm as the one in which she lived. She was raised in an orphanage. There, educators took care of her and other children, taught them how to live, helped, listened, and pitied them. One day, returning home late at night from a part-time job, she ran into a group of guys. They started molesting the girl. There was no one nearby. These 3 attacked the alien. She couldn't even make a sound out of fear. The horror of that evening haunted her for several weeks, until she realized that she was pregnant. She made an interruption. She did not want to raise a child without knowing who his father was. Jane's friend, whom she had already befriended, helped organize everything. I found a doctor who would agree to do everything quickly, without additional examinations, collecting certificates and passing tests. If it wasn't for Jane, she would have gone crazy. The friend was the only person who knew about this terrible incident. Have I offended you in some way? George asked, noticing that the girl had withdrawn into herself. Are you thinking about something? I'm just really tired. I'm sorry, said Alien. They had already reached her entrance. The stars were shining in the sky. The barely opened leaves on the trees glistened softly in the light breeze. George took Alien's hands, turned her towards him, and looked intently into her eyes. How fluffy her eyelashes are, he thought. I really don't want to part with you. The guy said quietly. Let's go out of town for the weekend and have a little picnic. I'll take my mom's car, we'll go for a ride. I promise you won't regret it. I know such a wonderful place where no sad thoughts can come to mind. I'll think about it, Alien replied. I have to go. Yes, of course. I will hope to see you again. He wanted to kiss her on the cheek, but the girl had already turned around and walked to the door. That night, Alien fell asleep with mixed feelings in her soul. On the one hand, she liked George so much, she had never experienced anything like this before. A strange excitement enveloped her in a soft veil. But the fact that he had stirred up the most unpleasant memories in her overshadowed all the pleasant moments of the evening. Life was unfair to her. But Alien has long since come to terms with this, and tried to live independently so that someone from above would see that she was worthy of happiness. She will do everything for this. The morning began with a loud doorbell. She woke up, looked at her watch. 9:30 in the morning. Who was brought in so early? Slipping her feet into her slippers, she went into the hallway and opened the door. Jane appeared on the threshold. Are you still asleep? The friend flew into the apartment with lightning speed, kicked off her high-heeled shoes and proceeded to the kitchen. The girl followed her, rubbing her eyes. Is that how you can sleep when I have such news for you? What's the news? Coffee first, I really want to cheer up. Jane has already opened the closet and took out the still unopened jar that Galen bought the day before when she went to the grocery store. What are you standing for? Put the kettle on. Why are you so excited? From the powerful energy of her friend, Alien woke up to the end. She filled the kettle with water, put it on the stove and turned on the gas. Late last night, the owner of the salon called me and said that she was taking you and me to work. Think about it, something happened there. One of the masters mixed up the compositions in the oxidizer and dyed her hair blue. There was such a scandal. In short, this creative was fired right away, and the hostess called me. Come on. Alien was surprised that such a layman could work in the salon. Yes, and I called you right away, but you didn't answer the phone, and then you became unavailable at all. By the way, your phone is out of range right now. Jane cut off a piece of sausage in a masterly way and was preparing to start breakfast. Anyway, get ready. We have to be in the salon by 11 o'clock. Can you imagine? Now you and I have a permanent job. Where were you yesterday? Why didn't you answer? Jane shouted loudly so that the alien could hear. I was walking. The answer came from the bathroom. Jane would not have been surprised by her friend's response if she had said that she had been sleeping or reading, or at the very least watching the series. But for Alien to walk, and even so late. The girl still remembered that terrible incident and knew that Alien tries not to go alone in the evenings. Her friend's answer put her in a stupor, so she wasn't walking alone. When she came out of the bathroom, Jane was already all turned on with curiosity. Well, who were we walking with? What is it? She asked, smiling slyly. With George. Alien simply replied. Yes, did he ask you out? What date? Come on. We just went for a walk, sat in a cafe. Then he walked me home. Alien's cheeks suddenly turned pink. I'm happy for you, girlfriend. George is a great guy. And it's great that he liked you so much that he invited you for a walk the very next day after meeting you. And you didn't want to go to the party yet. It doesn't mean anything, Alien insisted. We just went for a walk. Okay, just so simple. It was not in Jane's rules to pry into other people's personal affairs. Come on, get ready. From that day on, Alien's life began to change for the better. The hostess of the beauty salon, where they had been interning all this time, greeted the girls quite affably. She showed them their workplace. The girls still had one for two. They had to work in shifts, but it suited them. Alien is completely immersed in her work. She was fascinated by everything that happened in the salon and liked it when the clients left happy, refreshed, rejuvenated. The magic of hairdressing fascinated her. Here comes a lady who is well over 50, and after half an hour no one will give her that age. A new hairstyle, a beautiful hair color without a hint of gray, styling that suits her very well. The client is happy. Alien is proud of its work. Carried away, she almost completely forgot about Igor, but he called on Friday night. "Hi, have you considered my offer to go on a picnic?" Alien was taken by surprise by this call. She wanted to see the man again, next to whom her heart began to beat faster. "I work until lunch on Saturday," she replied hesitantly. "It's okay, we'll go after lunch." The guy said confidently. "Agreed?" "Okay." Alien agreed. "I'll pick you up at 2:00 dot." "Okay, yes, I'll be waiting." She hung up the phone and wondered if she was in too much of a hurry, going alone with a guy out of town, where there would be no one else. She liked George, but the negative experience of communicating with guys was alarming. She pushed bad thoughts away from herself, persuaded that everything would be fine. George just couldn't hurt her. He is decent, intelligent, educated, well-mannered. She was not mistaken and did not regret for a minute that she went on a picnic with George. He picked her up, as promised. They raced along a country highway, enjoying the wind spinning in the car, through the open windows and the music playing from the radio. Alien admired the beautiful landscapes flashing by the window, and George looked at her and smiled. He brought her to the shore of a small lake. "How do you like the place? What is it?" he asked, opening the trunk of the car to get groceries and a folding barbecue. "It's very beautiful. It's amazing. I'm glad you like it." George handed Alien a basket of fruits and vegetables, and he took care of the meat. "In general, it will be very crowded here in the summer. While the bathing season has not started, you can count on privacy. And I can't swim at all." "They didn't teach this in our orphanage," said Alien. "They taught me a lot of things, but they didn't teach me to swim." "What's the problem? Do you want me to teach you?" "Well, when summer comes, of course." George laughed. "I don't know." The girl was slicing tomatoes and cucumbers with might and main, laying out apples on plastic plates. In between, she watched George masterfully cook meat on coals and enjoyed the aroma of an almost finished barbecue. It was a wonderful day. They had a great time, enjoyed delicious food, listened to music, laughed, and just talked about different topics. George no longer touched on the topic of the past. She felt at ease and comfortable with him. At some point, the guy thought about it and looked at Alien carefully. "You know, when you came to the party that night, I just couldn't take my eyes off you," he said softly. "You are special, not like the girls from my department, like childhood friends, like those around me." Alien was silent, not knowing what to say to such a revelation of the guy. "I want you to be my girlfriend. I want to get to know you better every day, be there for you, help and protect you." Goosebumps ran down Aliona's body. I have never said such words before. The girl was pleased, but she did not know what to answer in such cases, so she continued to remain silent. "Don't you like me?" George asked, looking into her blue eyes. "I like you," Alien replied softly. "But are you sure you need someone like me? You have an education, a nice apartment, Mom, after all. And I'm just a hairdresser." "It doesn't matter at all. I'm sure you're going to be very good. And don't worry about Mom. She'll like you, I'm sure. I think you're in a hurry. We don't know each other at all." Alien picked a blade of grass and fiddled with it in her hands. "Don't worry, I won't rush you. I just want us to be together. I just want to see you more often." "I agree. Let's meet up. And sometimes spend time together." They smiled at each other. The situation lightened up by itself. George brought the alien home when it was already dark outside. Without knowing why, she was in no hurry to get out of the car. She was pleased to be with him. She did not want to part at all. George looked at her and was silent. And then he took my hand, brought his face closer, and kissed me. When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her and smiling. "See you later." He should have said goodbye, but he still wouldn't let go of her hand. "Yes, see you," Alien said softly. After going up to the apartment, she sat down on the sofa and closed her eyes. There was a viscous silence in the room. I didn't want to turn on the TV or even the light. The girl felt George's kiss on her lips over and over again, and some kind of unrestrained, soft, warm happiness filled her from the inside. It's been 6 months. George defended his diploma and worked at his mother's publishing house. During this time, the girl managed to get regular customers in the beauty salon who wanted only her to serve them. The hostess often praised the girl. "You have a talent, alien," she said. "It's not for nothing that you have such a record." "I'm glad I didn't make a mistake about you." George and Alien called each other every day. Whenever possible, we met, spent evenings together, went to cafes, went to the cinema, just walked. The guy, as promised, did not rush the alien. There was no intimacy between them during this time, only kisses and hugs. One day they settled comfortably in a cafe on the embankment, choosing a table by the window. It was drizzling outside, nailing the yellowed foliage to the asphalt, and the wind was trying hard to disperse the damp leaves. "You know," George said, holding the girl's hand, "I want you to meet my mom. I think it's time. I love you, and anyway, tomorrow I'm inviting you to dinner with us." "Does your mom know about me?" the girl asked. "She knows I have a girlfriend, but that's all. So I want you to get to know each other, and our relationship has moved to another level." "What do you mean?" "I want you to be able to come to our house as my beloved girl. I want everyone to know that we are together, that I have you and you have me. I'm afraid your mom won't like me. Don't worry about it. She will accept any choice I make. Mom loves me and will be happy if I'm happy." Alien nodded silently. But she was not completely sure that they were doing everything right. However, she hoped that everything would go well, and decided that she would definitely prepare properly for this meeting. Alien knew who would help and support her. When she got home, the first thing she did was call Jane. "Can you come?" she asked her friend. "Right now? Something happened?" "Yes, it happened. Please come." Alien knew that Jane would come rushing at the first call. You don't need to explain anything to her over the phone. Half an hour later, a friend was already ringing the doorbell. "I saw you at work today. What could have happened in a few hours?" Jane asked, walking into the kitchen. "Will you make coffee?" "Yes, I'll put the kettle on now." Alien took out the cups. "What happened is that George wants to introduce me to his mother tomorrow." "Come on." Jane knew, of course, that Alien and George were dating, that they were both in love. She also knew that apart from kissing, there was nothing between them. Therefore, I treated this relationship more like a platonic one. So I was surprised that George was already taking Alien to his home to introduce him to his mother. Usually it's not like that for couples. They sleep together a couple of times. If everything remains the same, introduce them to their parents, or even go to get acquainted when a pregnancy test shows 2 stripes. And here everything is somehow childish, and they are already going to bow to their mother. Yes, today he told me that tomorrow we are going to have dinner at their house. I'm really worried, Jane. What if she doesn't like me? Oh my God. Do you want to live with her or something? I already thought something incredible had happened to you. And then, just think, sit at the table, eat something homemade. You get different questions. This is usually the case. That's what I'm afraid of. What am I going to tell about myself? That my father was a criminal, my mother got drunk, and I grew up in an orphanage. She put her palms to her eyes, rubbing them to calm her pulse. Don't tell me that. Get off the subject or say you're dead. Usually after such an answer, tactful people do not ask how it happened. Well, that's a lie. Alien objected. You can't start a relationship with a lie. And George, didn't you lie about your parents? Jane asked. I wasn't lying, I just didn't say anything. He saw that this topic was upsetting me and did not touch it again. So don't tell his mother either. Jane hugged her friend by the shoulders and worries. And so everything will be fine. Don't you understand? It's rude not to answer questions. Alien, pull yourself together. You better think about what you will appear in front of your mother, advised a friend. It's true, the girl agreed. His mother is probably such an elegant lady, owns a publishing house, drives a car. And what a luxurious apartment they have. You know that. That's exactly why you have to be in all your glory. Come on, let's see what's in your closet that's decent. The girls went into the room. Jane opened the closet door in a masterly way and critically examined her friend's wardrobe one by one. Hangers with dresses and skirts flew onto the sofa. Listen, put on this knitted dress. A friend held out a hanger with a blue monochrome dress. Firstly, according to the weather. Secondly, nothing flashy. You will look quite decent. Do you think? Of course, it's better to pay attention to the appearance. Make light makeup and you can curl the hair at the tips. That's all. Jane seemed very pleased with herself. As always, she helped her friend solve the problem and was proud of it. Come on, you'll worry when we choose a wedding dress, laughed Jane. Come on, you're kidding. And what if he goes to introduce his mother? Then he wants to introduce her as a bride. It's like you came from another world. All guys do that. No, we haven't even had that yet. Alien spoke softly. And you didn't have that, as you say, just because you don't want to. George would have been glad for a long time. I'm sure of it. Jane, stop making me blush. She waved her friend away, pressed her cool palms to her hot cheeks. On the one hand, the girl was grateful to her friend for her support, but on the other, Jane's outspoken statements drove her crazy every time, put her into a stupor, made her blush. Nevertheless, she agreed with the advice about the dress, put it aside, and put the rest of the clothes back in the closet. The girls went into the hallway. That's it. I ran, Jane said, giving her friend a peck on the cheek. Tell me later how it went. Of course, what are you talking about? Who else am I going to tell? Alien closed the door behind her friend and looked at herself in the mirror. Still, George shouldn't have come up with this introduction to Mom, she thought. Had it been bad for the two of them all these months? After seeing the alien home, George drove home. Opening the apartment door, he shouted loudly. Mom, I'm at home. I'm in the kitchen, son. Go to dinner, Anne replied. You're hungry as a beast. The guy sat down at the table, and his mother put a plate of fried potatoes and sausages in front of him. But tomorrow you still have to cook a normal dinner with everything that should be on the table, the guy declared. Yes, and what kind of holiday is tomorrow? Anne asked, sitting down opposite her son and pouring him tea. And tomorrow, Mom, I'll introduce you to my girlfriend, George said solemnly. Unexpectedly, Mom smiled, propping her chin on her hand and leaning on the table. Nothing unexpected. We've been dating for 6 months now, George said. Give me the bread, please. The woman handed her son a plate with sliced bread. She took a deep breath. Anne knew that George was dating someone. He often talked on the phone with some girl. In addition, she could not help but notice that her son was simply glowing with happiness, did not stay at work too long, and came home late. She did not ask George about his personal life. I knew he would tell me everything himself when the time came. And now, apparently, that time has come. Once I decided to introduce her to my girlfriend, so it's very serious. Can you tell me a little bit who she is? Mother asked, so that I would at least know what to talk about with her. She's just a wonderful girl. George Ann interrupted. That's enough. The guy wiped his mouth with a napkin and got up from the table. Anne didn't like her son's answer. The smile quickly disappeared from her face. Mom, I hope there won't be any sausages on the table tomorrow. Cook everything beautifully and deliciously, as you know how, George asked. I have absolutely no time to cook. Offended, the woman decided to order food in a restaurant, since she is such a gourmet. Mom, she's not a gourmet, but my favorite girl. And I want your acquaintance to go well, so that she likes you and you like her. George hugged his mother's shoulders as much as he could on the cheek to make everything very tasty. I'm going to my room. The woman was left alone in the kitchen, confused. After sitting at the table for a couple more minutes, she began to clear away the dishes. Her boy has grown up, matured, and now she is no longer the main person in his life, but some strange girl. And so he decided to bring her to their house. This situation was expected. Any mother knows that sooner or later this moment will come. That's how life works. Anne also understood that time was running out. The son may very soon have his own family, and she will have grandchildren. It's only one thing to understand and know that it will happen there sometime in the distant future. And another thing is to stand on the threshold and meet the one who has captured the heart of her son. A sharp stab of jealousy pecked at her heart. But Anne did not want to quarrel with her son. Dinner will still have to be cooked, although there is absolutely no time to run around the shops. The woman sat down at the table again, took out her smartphone, and opened a website with grocery delivery at home. The next day, Anne called her secretary into her office. "Angela, I'm going to leave early today," she told the girl. "You will control everything here, and do not forget to close the office." "Has something happened?" Angela asked. "Yes, George is bringing his girlfriend to meet him today. We need to cook dinner," the boss replied. "Wow, congratulations." "With what, Angela?" Anne was angry. "I have no idea who this girl is, what she wants from my son. And the unknown, scares and worries. And there are so many scams around who are chasing young and successful people." "You're right." Angela nodded her head. "I'll do everything. I'll check it. I'll close it." "That's good." The boss calmed down. The woman took her purse, took out a keychain with car keys, and left the office. And Angela remained standing in the office thinking. She had liked the boss's son for a long time. She even showed him signs of attention, often brought coffee, and also dragged homemade pastries from home, tried to feed the guy. He always thanked her, but he didn't pay much attention to the girl. Angela knew and believed that gradually she would be able to win his heart. But now all her dreams are falling apart. Hearing the sound of the door opening, Anne took off her apron and hurried into the hallway. Her son was standing in front of her, holding the hand of a girl of about 20 years old. Her son's friend was smiling shyly. "Mom, meet Alien," said George. "Alien, this is my mom, Anne." "It's a pleasure," the girl said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. George's mother looked at her carefully, waiting for her son to help the girl take off her coat. Alien was wearing a simple knitted blue dress, long blonde hair curled over her shoulders. Anne noted that her son has good taste. The girl is really beautiful. He keeps himself modest. She even breathed a sigh of relief for a moment. Alien, in turn, saw a beautiful, statuesque, elegantly dressed woman in front of her. She looked like she couldn't even be 40 years old. "Come into the living room," George's mom suggested. "I'll be right there. I have more hot stuff in the oven." "Yes, come on in, don't be shy. Make yourself at home." George pushed the girl towards the open doors to the hall. She had been here once before, at a party. But today the room looked very different. There was a beautifully set table in the center. The room was illuminated by a large crystal chandelier with many ringing droplets. There was silence. "Don't be afraid of anything," George whispered in the girl's ear and helped her sit down at the table. "Mom, do you need any help?" Anne was already entering the living room, carrying a platter of baked meat in her hands. "You'd better sit down at the table." There was silence in the room for a while. No one knew where to start a conversation. Mom was the first to break this awkwardness. "Son, take care of the guest and me. Put the salad on." She smiled at the alien. While George was putting food on plates, the woman decided to ask the girl. "Alien, tell us about yourself. What do you do?" "Are you a student?" Anne asked. "No, I'm working," the girl replied softly. "Yes? I wonder who." "Mom, she works as a hairdresser in a beauty salon." George was ahead of the girl with the answer. "She is very talented. She is appreciated at work." "Didn't you get an education?" The guy's mother continued the interrogation. "No, unfortunately," replied Alien. "I took a hairdressing course and immediately went to work." The mother looked at her son significantly. Her first impression of the pretty girl was already beginning to deteriorate. Anne saw an educated girl with a status, or at least a good profession, next to George. "And here's the hairdresser. And who are your parents? What do they do?" Alien was silent, head down. She expected such questions, but it turned out to be very difficult to answer. "Mom, Alien has no parents," George answered for the girl. And anyway, what are you bothering about? Let the guest eat in peace." "What do you mean there are no parents?" The woman put down her fork and knife. "And who raised you, supported you?" "I grew up in an orphanage." Finally, Alien gathered her willpower and answered decisively. Natalia Ilyinichna's eyebrows went up. She was silent for a while, and then got up, took a dish from the table and asked her son George, "Will you help me make tea?" "Yes, of course." The guy got up from the table and followed his mother. When they disappeared through the door, Alien gathered up the empty plates and headed to the kitchen to help clear the table too. Walking down the hallway, she heard Anne's voice. "Are you crazy? Who did you bring into the house?" She chastised George, the hairdresser from the orphanage. "Are you going to marry her?" "We haven't discussed it yet, but I really love Alien," the guy replied. "Over my dead body, do you hear? I will never let you ruin your life by associating it with this beggar from the orphanage." Suddenly, mother and son noticed in the doorway with plates in their hands. The girl took a few steps forward and put the dishes on the table. "Here, I picked it up from the table," she said, turned around and walked away. "Mom, there must be at least some sense of tact," George said angrily. "How can you not understand? She's my girlfriend." The door lock clanged loudly. It was Alien who left, slamming the door. George rushed after him, putting on his jacket and hat as he went. "Alien, stop." He caught up with her in the yard. "Yes, you stop, I say." He grabbed the girl, turned her around, and held her tightly. "I'm not letting you go anywhere," he said, looking into her eyes. "I love you. And I will never enter your house again." The girl said softly. "Never mind. Mom just doesn't know you yet." He began to kiss her cheeks, wet with tears. Resentment against a woman who, in the first hour of meeting her, poured mud over her, poured out salty drops. She was crying like a child who had been wronged. She was very hurt and hurt. Did she really deserve such hurtful words for all that Alien had to go through? After all, she didn't say a bad word to George's mother. "I want to go home," the girl said, calming down a little. "Come on, I'm with you. I'm not coming back either until Mom apologizes to you." They caught a taxi and got to the Alien house very quickly. George, as usual, stopped at the girl's entrance, hugged and kissed her on the lips. And she suddenly took his hand and said, "Let's go." She pulled George towards the door. They ran up to the floor. The girl hurriedly opened the door. Everything that happened after that should have happened a long time ago. George dreamed of intimacy with his girlfriend, but waited for her to want it herself. And she wanted to. Today, more than ever, she needed his embrace, his love. He was whispering, "I love you. I love you." When dawn broke, George said, "I want to always be with you. Let's get married." She did not immediately understand the meaning of his words. She sat up, covered herself with a blanket, and looked at George in surprise. "Are you serious?" "It can't be more serious." "What about your mom?" Looking anxiously into the guy's eyes, Alien asked. "What does my mom have to do with it?" he replied. "She has her own life. I am an adult, self-sufficient person. I have a good job. You and I will get along just fine without her help." The girl threw herself on his chest. "I love you so much," she whispered. They spent the whole next day together, cooking lunch together, walking through the streets of the sleeping area, kissing and feeling absolutely happy. After coming home with their shopping, George and Alien began to cook dinner. Suddenly the phone rang. "This is mine," George said, and went into the room to answer the phone. Sensing something was wrong, Alien sat down on a chair. From what she could hear from the kitchen, the girl realized that George's mother was calling. "I'm not coming back until you reconsider your attitude towards Alien. Mom," the guy was saying. "Stop shouting." "No, I'll come to work tomorrow as usual." "All right." He returned to the kitchen and saw a sad Alien. "Come on, baby. It's okay. We're together." He hugged the girl, and then suddenly picked her up in his arms and spun her around. "Aren't they going to feed me in this house today?" She laughed and became light and calm that George did not gather at his mother's first call, and did not leave her after what had happened between them. In the morning, Alien cooked breakfast, but George refused, drinking only a cup of coffee. I have to run home and change before work, he said. And in the evening? Asked Alien anxiously. And what about tonight? I'll pick you up at the beauty salon after work. Let's go to your place. Or do you not like my constant presence in that apartment? I really like it, the girl smiled. George kissed her and left. When he arrived home, his mother was gone. She went to the publishing house. After changing clothes and taking the folder with the manuscripts he was working on, George also hurried to the office. Angela's secretary met him in the hallway. Hello. Would you like some coffee? No, not now, I'm sorry, the guy answered on the move and hurried to the office of the correction service. He was working on a big project and deadlines are tight. I wanted to have time to complete the planned amount of work in order to spend the evening with Alien. But about 15 minutes later, the internal phone on his desk rang. I called my mother. Without asking Vera if he could come in, he opened the door to his mother's office. Did you call? Well-mannered people say hello first, Anne said without looking up from the papers on the table. Well-mannered people do not insult people about whom they know nothing at all and respect the choice of others. Hello, Mom. Anne raised her head and looked at her son attentively. Inside her, there was a struggle between a mother who endlessly loves her only son and a woman whose place a beautiful young girl wants to take. In this struggle, love and jealousy had equal powers. Hello, son. I need to talk to you. George sat down on a chair next to a large conference table. He didn't want to think about what had happened at their house. But the guy understood that he would have to talk about it. His mother is his own person, and they will have to compromise. Let's talk, he agreed. I guess I was wrong. I realized this during the day that you were not at home. I changed my mind a lot. You see, George, this is not the future I imagined for you. And what did you imagine? The guy interrupted his mother in anger. Did you think that I would bring home the daughter of an oligarch, an airy dummy, for whom only trips to salons, spas, and endless shopping are important? Mom, you understand, I love Alien just because I love her, because she loves me. And she does it sincerely. If you want to know, I fell in love with her at first sight. We've been dating for 6 months now. Do you really think that if I had doubted her feelings for even a minute, I would have continued my relationship with her? Calm down, son, I believe you. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Anne tried to soften the tone of the conversation. Sit down, tell me, are you serious about marrying an alien? Yes, Mom. I seriously intend to get married. Well, in the end, I have to trust your choice. And in this case, I will soon have grandchildren, right? Well, we didn't think about it. Maybe they will. George was still offended by his mother, although he felt that she was ready for reconciliation. Well, okay, I apologize to Alien. She will soon become a member of our family and my daughter-in-law. Let's apply and let her come to us on the weekend. Let's discuss the preparations for the wedding. George was confused. It wasn't like her mother to make peace so quickly. Anne has always had a strong character, was able to defend her opinion, and did not deviate from it. Otherwise, she would not have been successful in business. But on the other hand, he was glad that she had at least accepted his decision. You really don't mind if we get married? George asked incredulously. Since you love Alien, I don't mind. The main thing for me is your happiness, son. She went up to George and hugged him. It was hard to accept that her son would have his own family, but otherwise she could lose her son. And Anne couldn't let that happen. Thank you, Mom. George thanked me. Only I will live with Alien, so we will come together on the weekend. But this condition does not suit me at all. The mother objected. First of all, there are some rules of decency. The bride and groom do not live in the same apartment before the wedding. And secondly, you have your own house to which you take your young wife. In the meantime, live separately. That's what I insist on. Believe me, it's the right thing to do. There was a steely note in Anne's voice again. George thought for a moment, and then said, You're probably right, Mom. That's settled. I'll be waiting for you at home tonight. In the meantime, go work. Walking down the corridor of the publishing house, George still could not believe that his mother had made concessions to him and was ready to accept Alien. He was already looking forward to telling her about everything tonight. And why wait for the evening? "Alien, do you have your passport with you?" George asked the girl, having reached her by phone. "Yes, what happened?" "We'll meet at the fountain in the center at lunchtime." "Agreed?" "Okay, what happened?" "You'll find out. I'll be waiting." George hung up the phone. He thought for a while, and then picked up the smartphone in his hand again and dialed the flower delivery service. He can't lead Alien to apply without a bouquet. 2 months later, George and Alien got married. The young people were happy. Anne was at a loss not to fall into the dirt in front of the guests, and she named more than 50 people. Most of the invited people are colleagues from the publishing house, business partners, and friends of the woman. But the young ones invited Jane and Alex, as well as several friends of George. The wedding was celebrated in a restaurant. Alien looked amazing in a snow-white dress, and George in a blue suit with buds of small white roses seemed very solemn and grown up. Looking at her son, Anne wiped away a tear from time to time. After the wedding, the young couple settled in the apartment of the groom of his mother. After long-term disputes, it was decided that while they would live together with Anne, it would be seen further the apartment is large. There is enough space for everyone. Alien tried to help Anne with the housework. She didn't know how to cook much. They didn't teach this at the orphanage, but I bought a book with recipes and cooked according to it. But her mother-in-law always praised her for her cleanliness. The daughter-in-law was really a very neat girl. She kept the whole apartment clean. Almost immediately after the wedding, the family began a tradition of dining together on Sundays. If on other days the young people could go to a restaurant or eat without waiting for their mother-in-law, then on Sunday from 17 everyone had to be at the table. She cooked mostly for Alien, but Anne often joined her if she was free. So one Sunday, the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law were cooking Sunday dinner together in the kitchen. George was not at home. He went out to the store. While Alien was chopping vegetables, her husband's mother was flipping through a magazine. Her sister-in-law asked her to move the pot. The woman abruptly stood up, picked up the pot, and then her eyes went dark. She fell to the floor, knocking over a 3-liter bowl of boiling broth. "Oh my God!" screamed Alien and rushed to her husband's mother. She was screaming loudly. Then the scream turned into a soft sob. The girl grabbed the phone and dialed the medics. When George approached the entrance, his mother was already being loaded into the car on a stretcher. Alien was crying nearby. "What's wrong? What's wrong with Mom?" "This is terrible." She dropped a pot of broth on herself. He was very hot. The guy shoved a package into his wife's hands. "Go home, I'll go with her," he said. She couldn't find a place for herself at home. She has already reproached herself 100 times for asking her mother-in-law to remove the saucepan from the stove because she could have done it herself. George returned late in the evening. "How's Mom?" Alien asked anxiously. "Severe burn, he will be in the hospital." The husband replied wearily. "How did this happen?" "I was chopping vegetables, and she was reading something in a magazine. I asked her to remove the saucepan from the heat, and she stood up and then swayed and fell. Maybe I was dizzy. It's my fault." "Come on, it's not your fault. My mother thinks I don't know anything, but her blood pressure has been jumping for a long time. Age doesn't make anyone healthier. Everything will be fine, don't worry." The patient was in the hospital for a whole month. George had to take over the duties of the director of the publishing house. Alien asked for a vacation at work and took care of her mother-in-law. She hardly left her side, stayed in the hospital room from morning to evening, fed her, helped her change clothes, talked to her, and read the manuscripts given to her by George. During this time, the daughter-in-law and mother-in-law became very close. After being discharged from the hospital, they came home as relatives. At dinner, Anne said in a serious tone, "That's it, my children. I've had time to think about everything. George, since you're doing a great job as director, so be it. Stay in the manager's chair, and I will rest. Mom, are you sure?" "Don't interrupt. I have another solution." His mother cut him off. "I bought a plot in the city a long time ago. It's time for us to get out of this 3-room den, which I hope will soon become too small for us." You're going to give me grandchildren, aren't you? So son, start building a house. I think we can do it in 2 or 3 years. What a surprise. Alien gasped in shock. This is all very well, of course, but I would also like to discuss something with you. I turned to George's wife and mother. I have some savings, and I thought my wife will stop working for her uncle, or rather for her aunt. She may have her own beauty salon, albeit a small one, but still her own. What do you think, Mom? Alien looked in surprise at her husband, then at her mother-in-law. Everything that was said at the table that evening was very unexpected for her. She could not imagine herself as the owner of the salon. That's a great idea, Anne smiled. Let her learn how to run a business, and you help her. I do not know what to say, the girl said happily. That's how much you need to do: find a room, buy equipment, recruit staff. You can handle everything. You're a smart girl. Well, that's nice, Anne said, looking at her happy son and daughter-in-law. As they say, there would be no happiness, but misfortune would help. 8 years have passed. The family has long since moved into a large 2-story house with its own plot. Anne set up a small flower garden, took care of plants, grew roses, asters, peonies. George ran a publishing house that flourished and brought in good income. Alien has turned into a real businesswoman. Everything was fine, but Alien still couldn't get pregnant. She and George went through a lot of examinations, but all in vain. She never told her husband about the termination of her pregnancy, which she had done many years ago. She didn't want him to know about that unpleasant event in her life. But in her heart, Alien blamed herself for not being able to give birth to her husband's son or daughter. Only the absence of children has overshadowed the life of this family. George was preparing to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the publishing house. It was announced to the staff that the corporate event would be held in the restaurant. Everyone is invited, as well as regular customers and partners. Everyone was in high spirits. George was giving the last assignment to Vera, who stood in front of him with a notebook, writing down everything he said. She still hadn't given up trying to win over the handsome director. George paused, looked her up and down critically. Her clothes were too provocative. Angela, did it ever occur to you to dress more decently for work? The man asked. Don't you like it? The girl was defiantly spinning around herself. In my opinion, it is very fashionable and stylish. In my opinion, it's just vulgar, the director interrupted her. The day before, George's mother again started talking about the fact that they could not give her grandchildren in any way, which brought Alien to tears. The man was already so tired of rushing between his mother and his wife, calming one or the other, that sometimes he did not even want to return home. Remembering his wife's tantrum yesterday, he sighed heavily. He also wanted a son, but he loved Alien no less than 8 years ago, and was not going to part with her just because there was no baby in their family. His mother indirectly insisted that George get a divorce, all the time repeating that the years were flying by, that she was getting old and would soon not be able to babysit her grandson if he ever did show up. Trying to banish sad thoughts from himself, George plunged into work. My wife refused to go to a corporate party on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the publishing house, citing ill health. She cried all night again and fell asleep in the morning only thanks to the pills she took. He kissed his wife as usual and left the house. Alien watched sadly as her husband got into the car and drove out the gate. The woman felt that she had been in a terrible state for a long time. Even the 2 weeks at sea that they spent with her husband this summer could not completely rid her of this condition. She didn't want to go to a restaurant with her husband, have fun, and be happy when she felt so bad. Also, the mother-in-law constantly added fuel to the fire, whispered to her husband that it was necessary to leave a barren wife, and sometimes openly expressed her dissatisfaction, bringing Alien to tears. The marriage was bursting at the seams, and she didn't know what to do. The restaurant was fun and noisy. The guests were dancing. From time to time, a pause was announced, which was filled with congratulations and gifts. The publisher's birthday was a great success. Only George somehow got over it very quickly. He downed glass after glass, hardly eating, and by the end of the evening he was almost on his feet. Thank you all so much for the congratulations. I love you all, everyone, shouted the sweetest director. Such behavior by George Ilyich, whom the whole city knew, could cause irreparable damage to the reputation of the publishing house. but he did not care. At one point, he even started dancing, which shocked some guests and made others have fun. Someone even took out a smartphone and started filming the inappropriate behavior of the director of the publishing house. Watching all this, Angela's secretary became more and more horrified. She knew her boss well. The next day, he will bitterly regret what he did the day before. But now something had to be done to prevent the situation from going too far. So that George would not embarrass himself in front of his partners, who were already squinting at him, looking disapprovingly. "Let me dance with you." Angela grabbed the director by the waist, hugged him to her, and began to push him towards the exit. "Where are you taking me?" "I want to have fun," muttered George. "And now we will continue to have fun, only in the fresh air." Angela coaxed him, continuing to push him towards the exit. On the street, she caught the first taxi she saw and put the director there. She sat down next to him and gave the driver the address. "Where are we going, Angela?" George asked her. "To a secret place where no one will know how you fought today." "George Eliot," the secretary said affectionately. "Do we need to go there?" the director asked, trying to lift his head from Vera's lap. He seemed ready to go to sleep in the car. After paying off the taxi driver, Angela barely pulled the director out of the car and dragged him to her home. The girl lived in a hostel, but she had a good relationship with the janitor. So, after grumbling a little, the old woman let her pass with a man. In the room, Angela took the bottle of cognac she had started from the cabinet and poured it into glasses. "Okay, you need to shake things up a little," she said, holding up the man's card. After drinking a little, after a while George began to come to his senses. "Where am I?" he asked. "And you're in a secret place," Angela said affectionately, hugging and kissing him. "You'll be very happy here. You have no idea how good it's going to be for you." George did not understand well what he was doing, but he did not lose his masculine strength. Even despite the large amount of alcohol she drank, she achieved what she wanted. She finally dragged the director into her bed. In the morning, George had a terrible headache. He was horrified to find himself in a small room in an unfamiliar bed, with his secretary lying next to him. Still swaying slightly, he got out of bed, found his clothes, and began to get dressed. At home, George said that he had had too much, did not want to return home like this, and slept on the sofa in his office at the publishing house. "Go take a shower and go to rest." "You need to sleep it off," said Alien. "Ugh, how you stink. Why did you drink so much?" "Forgive me, my dear. I don't know what came over me." George's mother and wife tried not to remember this incident anymore, but Angela, at every opportunity, reminded the director of how good it was together. She continued to stick to him at work every day. George was stressed out by all this, but he felt guilty. He was angry at himself, not at Angela. One day, the secretary entered the office uninvited. She looked worried. "Is something wrong, Angela?" George asked. "It happened. I'm pregnant." Angela lowered her head. "From you." George got up from his desk, walked over to the secretary and looked into her eyes. "You're not lying. Is there no mistake?" "No. What should I do now?" Angela sobbed. "Calm down. And what should be done in this situation?" "At least to provide for me and the child, at most to get married. After all, this is your baby. So the second is excluded. I'll help you with the money. I still need a place to live. It's not like raising a kid in a dorm. I'll decide go." The girl left the office, and George sat down in an armchair and dropped his head into his hands. He's going to have a long-awaited baby. His blood, not from my wife. And this is a fact that both pleased and worried the man at the same time. He very quickly came up with a place to comfortably accommodate Angela and her unborn child in Alina's apartment. It's empty anyway. George will say that he handed her over to an employee who has temporary difficulties. 2 more years have passed. That night, when Alien unexpectedly witnessed her husband's conversation with his mother, she could no longer sleep. She and George became more and more estranged from each other and no longer made any attempts to get closer. We lived as friends, as buddies, sometimes even as neighbors. Now, staying late at work, George did not even consider it necessary to explain the reason. Alien went to work in the salon as if on autopilot. And then such a shock. George has another family. Her husband has a child on the side. The baby she couldn't give birth to. In the morning, Alien drank coffee and went to the salon. Thoughts of the double life of her beloved husband did not leave her. She walked, hardly seeing anything in front of her. She was startled out of her state by the screeching of car tires right at the pedestrian crossing. A huge black Jeep hit a girl with a stroller. Alien rushed to the victim. At this time, the driver of the Jeep turned on the rear and disappeared from view in just a matter of seconds. "Girl, are you alive?" Alien bent over the young mother lying on the asphalt. A crowd had already begun to gather. A pool of blood was slowly developing on the asphalt next to the victim's head. Hearing the baby crying, Alien rushed to pick up the overturned stroller. The boy in the blue suit was crying. The woman unhooked the restraining straps on the stroller and grabbed the child in her arms. "Hush, hush, little one," she whispered to the baby. "It's okay. It's all over now. Don't cry." She rocked the boy, hugging him to her. At that time, the ambulance sirens were heard. People stumbled, giving doctors access to the girl lying on the asphalt. The victim was put on a stretcher and loaded into a car. Almost simultaneously, the police arrived with the ambulance. "Is she alive?" The uniformed officer asked the doctor. "So far, yes, but I'm afraid it won't take," said the doctor. "Here, there was a phone next to her. Okay, give it to me. I need to call my relatives." "Are there any witnesses?" A policeman shouted into the crowd. "I'm a witness," said Alien, continuing to rock the baby in her arms. The policeman looked closely at the frightened woman with the child. "I had to decide something, call my relatives. In the meantime, what should I do with it?" "Let this woman babysit him. Get in the car," the employee said, and he began to look through the contacts in the victim's smartphone and call the numbers that he thought belonged to the closest people. On the way to the hospital, the baby calmed down and fell asleep. Carefully carrying him in her arms, Alien entered the emergency room and sat down on a chair. "Wait here, my father will arrive now." "I got through," the policeman told the woman. "What about the boy's mom?" the alien asked. "She's being operated on. Nothing is known yet. We will wait. The employee left, leaving Alien alone with the baby in her arms. She stared at the baby's face and couldn't take her eyes off it. He looked about a year old. Maybe more, maybe less. Alien didn't understand this. He smacked his lips pathetically in his sleep, sometimes smiling slightly at something. The woman's heart was bleeding. She did not notice how the door to the room opened, and an agitated man ran into the room. Alien raised her head and saw George in front of her. The husband was struggling to cope with excitement, breathing heavily. "What are you doing here?" George asked, not understanding why his wife was holding his son in her arms. "And you?" Alien was even more surprised. "I got a call. They told me that Angela was in an accident with a child." "Which Angela?" "Meh." Alien didn't understand anything at all. George took a deep breath and sat down next to his wife. He looked at his son, stroked his head. "This is my son, Eric," the man said softly. "A son?" "Oh." She understood everything, but for some reason she didn't feel any emotions at all. "Yes, it happened that way. He's very handsome. He looks like you," Alien smiled. George looked in surprise at his wife, who was admiring his child born to another woman. The wife did not throw a tantrum, did not ask questions. She was hugging his son to her chest, and he was sleeping peacefully, smiling at something in his sleep. "I'll explain everything to you. I wanted to say something to George." "Don't. The main thing is that he is alive. The main thing is that the baby was not injured." Alien put her finger to her lips. The figure of a doctor appeared at the end of the corridor. "I'm really sorry. We did everything we could. She died. Be strong." The doctor turned around and left. Alien and George were silent. The baby in the woman's arms stirred, waking up, as if he felt that his mother was no more. Alien was the first to speak. "What a horror. What's going to happen now?" she said, not looking at her husband. "I don't know. She doesn't even have any relatives. She was a visitor, it seems, George said. Alien stood up resolutely. The only right plan matured in her head. The city cemetery was quiet. Autumn leaves flew off the trees, laying down on the paths, granite slabs of tombstones and graves. A small group of people saw off Angela on her last journey. There were red flowers on her grave. Angela loved everything bright and catchy, even if there were red roses on her grave, George said. Among those who saw Angela off on her last journey were colleagues. Dressed in black clothes, they looked sadly at the photo of a beautiful young woman who just a year ago became the mother of a beautiful baby. The colleagues were talking quietly. No one could accept until now that a cheerful, never discouraged, very energetic woman died under the wheels of a reckless driver who did not even consider it necessary to call an ambulance and provide first aid. George and Alien were standing at the grave. They were silent. The terrible tragedy made them close, dear people again. George took his wife's hand and stroked her palm. He did not doubt for a minute that everything in their lives would be fine. The husband and wife stood for a while longer and slowly walked along the cemetery alley towards the gate. There, outside the gate, Anne was strolling leisurely, pushing a stroller in front of her with her little grandson Eric. Liz never regretted trading her family for science. And how did she do that? That's what people said. She was sure that both could be perfectly combined, just that her life's work had to come first. Because the family, if you make a step aside, let go, so to speak, the reins, it will not go anywhere from you, but science. Just dare to be not diligent enough of its student and faithful adherent, but just dare. You'll find yourself on the margins. No, Liz had never regretted that her calling had come first. Not until a sudden severe illness had turned her whole world upside down. And now she wondered if it was her own fault that her family treated her so badly. Maybe she should have given more love? Although, she did love. And did she really deserve everything that was happening to her? Liz Tyler had been born into a special kind of family, where whatever generation she came from, whatever branch of the family, they would all be intelligent people, the cream of the crop, so to speak. In any case, it had been so since the end of the 18th century and up to the 20s of the 20th century. And then, in connection with the well-known historical events, much of course changed. The family thinned out. The family was scattered all over the world. Then, however, by the 60s, many things seemed to have been restored to the Tyler family, including a solid position in society, accumulation of all sorts of benefits. But still Liz remembered the words of her grandfather, who said that before, much earlier, everything was different. Liz's peers were not the same, in the sense that they didn't want to obey their elders and continue the family business. They invented all sorts of things. No, look at this. Liz's grandfather Elliot once resented, "How can you become a cook when I told you to be an archaeologist? Maybe you'll rediscover Babylon." And no cake for my anniversary. This bastard will not bribe me. That's how Elliot felt about his son, Uncle Liz. But then, by the way, he graciously forgave him and even admitted that he'd never eaten a cake as delicious as the one his son had made. But still, those were the days when not many people in the Tyler family were doing the great things of the past. Except that Liz was, as Elliot said, completely of their breed. Because she knew from childhood that she was going to be a historian. And she chose a difficult direction, the early Middle Ages in Europe, in its northern regions, with a special focus on folk culture, mythology, tales of that era. Liz remembered that day as if she were running along the path of their cottage, past the tall pines, to the brick house, which from afar looked like a fairy tale castle, so skillfully built was its roof with decorative turrets. This cottage, by the way, was not kept by relatives to whom it was inherited in the 90s, and some strangers sold it, and those even demolished it. They wanted to build their own. But it seems that they did not calculate the money, and then there was some small wooden house in this place. And on the place where there was a luxurious flower garden, once greenhouses were put and grew vegetables for sale. "Grandpa," shouts Liz and throws herself at the old man's neck. "I've passed my last exam. I'm done studying." Elliot laughs, and although he is many years old, it seems like 100, he hugs his granddaughter tightly and pulls her off the ground, spinning her around as if she were 5 years old, and laughs back. What a clever girl. Our breed. Now there will be someone to pass on Princess Pelagia's gold to. Oh, that gold of Princess Pelagia, Tyler's main family treasure. It was said that once it would have been enough for a whole chest. There were heavy bracelets, many rings, necklaces, headbands, braid clips, brooches, precious shoe buckles. But by the will of fate, sometimes unfavorable, by the 70s of the 20th century, when Liz Young just graduated from the university, only a small part of it remained. However, Liz knew it was the biggest treasure in their family, and she was its main heir. And this gold, by the way, was not meant to be worn and walked around in. No way. It was supposed to be always, forever. Must be kept in a tiered casket, a kind of fancy wooden chest on velvet beds. According to family tradition, something of this splendor could be worn only once and only by one person, the eldest daughter or the wife of the eldest son on their wedding day. That's all. And the rest of the time, please keep the family wealth as it should be, because this is not some bling. Its beloved grandfather died when Liz was 27. She'd been sad for him for a long time. Because, well, she'd had a good relationship with her parents, but Grandpa was the only one she'd ever been really close to among the entire Tyler family. Parents, by the way, were suddenly the people who wanted to sell the gold. You see, they wanted to buy a check-made wall in the hall, a German kitchen set, and also a car. My parents said that Grandpa was gone and therefore there was no point in following the bourgeois tradition. But Liz stood her ground. She declared that if they touched any of the set, she would no longer be their daughter. My parents were a little shocked. Mom cried and said that she had raised an egoist, dresser, and generally abnormal. Dad looked sternly, coldly, and said he didn't expect such a thing from his own daughter. Liz was both ashamed and... No, Liz was overcome by a thirst to preserve the memory of her grandfather and the family legacy. Liz had loved hearing the legend of how the gold had come into the family, and after that memorable fight with her parents, she had taken the box with it to herself. And all her life she kept it with her in a safe place. After graduation, Liz got a job as an assistant to a historian, Dan, a grandfather's acquaintance. Then, having gained experience and recognition, so to speak, in narrow circles, she began to teach at the university herself. She was known as a strict, ruthless teacher to her students. Liz did not want to get married. She was not interested in all this romantic fuss. But, still, youth took its toll, and at 32 she married Nick. Grandpa Elliot, by the way, this union would hardly approve, because Nick had nothing to do with the intelligentsia and was a hereditary worker. But he understood Lisa and everything, respected her choice, and they lived soul to soul for exactly 20 years. Until the accident happened, Nick died at work. Just scaffolding construction once collapsed. Meanwhile, it was already the 90s. Liz was left practically alone with her daughter Christy in her arms. While her husband was alive, she had not seen her daughter, but could continue to do her science. The child was looked after by a nanny. Now, there was no money for that. Liz was the sole breadwinner for her small family, and there were no relatives to help her. I mean, there were relatives, acquaintances, but in fact, she had drifted away from them over the years. In fact, no one was ready to take care of someone else's family. Many people considered Liz strange, almost insane, and reproached her for being too morbidly interested in her history, too high-minded about all the people of more, so to speak, ordinary professions. Liz, having lost her husband, felt the loneliness of it all. But then, after some grieving, she pulled herself together. There was no time to lose heart. She had to write a book about the Viking trek along the Silk Road. Having managed to save money, Liz hired a nanny again and returned to her craft. Her daughter was growing up. And too late, Liz noticed and realized how far she was from her own child. The revelation came suddenly, just one day, on the eve of Christy's high school graduation. Liz had told her to be careful at the party, not to drink any of that stuff, and to go home early. "You should have raised me earlier," snapped at her daughter. "You were never around. What do you know about me? I'm going to be 18 in a month, and that's it. I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" Liz asked in shock. "Anywhere. As long as I get away from here," Christy said and left, slamming the door. She said she would never be such a disgusting mother to her children. Liz felt very strange at the time. She was both angry and offended at her daughter. She was indignant at her ingratitude. She was fed, clothed, and clothed as well as anyone else. Should we go to the sea every year for a vacation? Obligatory. with tutors to study to get prospects through education? Absolutely. In general, what was missing? Was it that her mother didn't play dolls with her until she was 14? What the hell is wrong with that girl? Liz hoped that Christy would calm down, apologize, and they would get on with their lives. She also hoped that Christy would stop fooling around and go into a normal profession and become a historian, for example, or maybe a cultural historian, as was the norm in her family. Liz would also approve of such professions as sculptor, architect, restorer. But her daughter was once again unpleasantly surprised. By deciding to become an accountant, the fact that she had carried out her threat and left home to a neighboring town, where she had settled in a dormitory. Liz took offense at first, and then, well, she tried to get in touch. She sent her daughter money. It was well known that students needed it all the time. And slowly, as if they began to communicate a little better. But still, Christy made it clear that she had decided to live on her own, and without any respect almost didn't give a damn about the family heritage. "Who's going to carry on our business?" Liz asked. "What business of ours?" Christy replied with a wicked grin. What a dynasty. They had lived in their own world for generations, despising everyone around them, and what had they done? Do you know that you are considered crazy, like your grandfather Elliot? And him and your great-grandfather. I don't care. What did he see in his life? Dusty books and shards of clay. He was talking nonsense. So Liz was left alone. Suddenly there were no people around. There was a job, though, a destiny, a vocation. And she honestly tried to go headlong into it. All the more so when, after all these years, Grandpa Elliot's diaries turned up. The thing was that they had been handed down from an old friend of his who had died, and his heirs had decided not to throw away such antiques, but to give them to the person to whom they had once belonged. Liz was very surprised by this because she didn't understand why her grandfather would keep his diaries with a stranger, albeit a friend, a colleague. But she took them for herself. As a memory, I looked into them, of course. Most of it was really diary stuff about the weather, the minutiae of life. There were funny stories about lazy students trying to sneak cheat sheets in or cheat on exams, memories of the journeys Elliot had made in his life, some fairy tales written down there. Liz, who had a lot of her own things to do when she returned to the diary family, didn't have time for all that, so she put them away. Meanwhile, time flew by. The daughter, having finished her studies and not thinking of coming back, she decided to settle down in that foreign city. And there she met a man. Liz went and came back in tears because Christy had chosen the wrong man. You see, he was a new businessman. And in Liz's opinion, he looked like a gangster. And he was almost 20 years older than Christy. He was divorced and had a child from a previous relationship. His son's name was Joffrey. All in all, it was hardly a marriage to be happy about. Liz had even hoped that her daughter would come to her senses and divorce. But it didn't happen. But she had children, first a girl, whom she named Maggie, and then a son, Sami. Maybe you should move to our town. One day on the phone, Liz suggested to her daughter, I'd be closer to my family. I could help with the grandchildren. Why, Mom, are you retired already? Christy asked. Would you give up your job to devote yourself to your grandchildren? What do you mean? Liz didn't understand. I was just thinking. Don't think. Christy laughed. What's the point of me living with you? To fill my children's heads with the same nonsense. You think I don't know that you can't help me? You couldn't raise your own daughter properly. What grandchildren for you? However, fate had it that Liz did get close to her daughter's family, but it didn't work out the way she wanted it to. Christy had called one day and asked in an unexpectedly pitiful, begging voice if she could come to town with her husband's son from his first marriage. The thing was that the boy was diagnosed with a rare disease, and in that small town where Christy lived, just did not have the right specialists. Well, come, of course. Everybody come. Liz rejoiced. That is, she was happy that her daughter was coming with her own grandchildren. And the arrival of that ... stranger's child, she wasn't happy at all. Christy arrived, taking up her room in the large 2-bedroom apartment where the Tylers had lived for decades. Liz did her best to make the guests feel welcome, putting the best stuff on the table, offering to show off the town to the guys. Except that neither Maggie nor Sami were particularly happy to see their grandmother. They did not look like loving grandchildren. They were capricious, ill-mannered, rude boys. Maggie, at 9, to Liz's horror, had no table manners at all, but she could swear foully and ugly. And Sami, who was 7, was always messing up all the things he could get his hands on. Joffrey, not her own grandson, was not the man Liz had expected him to be. He was a tall boy for his 12 years. He had blonde hair, glasses, and a nose full of freckles. He was quiet, polite, and silent. Unlike his brother and sister, he was the only one who said he would be happy if Grandma showed him the town. Liz shrugged and decided it wouldn't hurt her to take him somewhere. "Shall we go to the park?" she asked. "Would you like to go on the rides? Could we go to the art gallery?" Joffrey asked, and Liz opened her mouth. "I didn't expect that." While her own grandchildren spent all their free time watching cartoons and silly shows on TV, this grandson read books and listened intently and thoughtfully to Liz's stories about the Tyler family. Sometimes it seemed to Liz that Joffrey was even more like their family's ancestors than Christy and her children. Liz was genuinely concerned about Joffrey's health problems, and when it became clear that he needed money for his medication, she withdrew the necessary amount from her bank account without question. And when it was time for Christy and the kids to go home, Liz saw them off with tears in her eyes and called them to come back again. Time flew on. Liz was now fully retired. Age was making itself felt. What used to seem like a simple ailment suddenly became a disease. And although Liz still had acquaintances in her circle, the same scientists, but they were all old, and after she left the university, after she stopped working, communication with them slowly came to naught. But what was surprising and frightening at the same time for Liz was that it was as if she didn't notice the passage of time. That is, she realized, of course, that another year had passed, another year, and so on, but this realization came on abruptly and painfully, as if the passage of time was also a kind of disease. And sometimes, especially in the evenings, it was almost physically unbearable for Liz to be alone in the big apartment. Then memories came back, about how nice it used to be here. Lots of family, guests, friends. And now? Books and cupboards, statues, paintings, everything the Tylers had saved up, preserved with great effort over decades of family history. Liz wondered more and more often who would get it all after she died. What would become of it all? As time slowly moved on. One day, everything finally and abruptly changed. It was at the end of winter, when it seemed there was no ice left on the street at all. But Liz's foot somehow found it, and the old woman fell awkwardly. The ambulance took her to the hospital, and the doctors determined it was a very compound fracture first, and a damaged back second. Liz, feeling helpless, lonely, called her daughter. Yes, a social worker visited her, but it was clearly not enough. And then Liz made up her mind. Christy has had many changes in her life over the years, by the way. She separated from her first husband and remarried, and in pursuit of her feminine happiness, she moved far away. "What do you want?" "I can't just jump up and come to you," replied Christy to her mother. "Maybe you need to go to some pension for the elderly?" Christy said that she had no time and that she did not understand how a mother could be so irresponsible. After all, in the boarding house, at least care and supervision of her will be. But if she will sit alone in her apartment and something else happens to her, then how can she be? And then, a few days after this difficult conversation, Liz was contacted by Christy's children. Maggie called. The granddaughter seemed very disturbed by what had happened to her grandmother and said that here she was in person available and could come and live with her, look after her. "Thank you, darling. Come on over," Liz replied. Maggie said she would buy the tickets as soon as she hung up the phone. She added that she'd come with Sami because he needed to see his grandmother too. "And Joffrey should come too," said Liz. Maggie hesitated and said that, actually, Joffrey was busy at the moment he was studying. But then she agreed that yes, perhaps he should tell her what had happened. "I don't understand you, though," Maggie added. "Why? He's no one." Liz disagreed. She didn't think of Joffrey as a stranger. Even if they didn't see each other often, maybe once or twice a year, there was something about him that made him different from her grandchildren. Something that made her think of Elliot's grandfather. I mean, really. Liz had been looking at old photos recently and could have sworn that Joffrey and Elliot were practically the same face. Finally, the grandchildren had arrived. Liz was ready to forget all the misunderstandings they'd had in the past because now she didn't feel lonely again. Maggie quickly took matters into her own hands, asking how her health was doing. How was everything in general? After a few weeks, however, Liz also began to realize that things were not as smooth as they had seemed at first. For one thing, Maggie seemed to have little patience. No, she didn't insult her grandmother in a direct way, but she could give her a sharp answer and tell her not to bother her with silly conversations. Sami was almost never home at all, and when Liz tried to find out where her grandson was, Maggie replied that it was none of her business. The only person in whose company Liz felt truly comfortable was Joffrey. He was already 23 years old and was graduating from university, and he wanted to become a professional jeweler. It's a very good profession, Liz praised his choice once again. Our grandfather Elliot's great-grandfather's cousin was a jeweler. He even made jewelry for the English royal family. You're very capable, Joffrey. You'll do very well. Only Joffrey, by the way. Liz had shown the Tyler family treasure Princess Pelagia's gold more than once and more than twice. And only he willingly listened to the legend that told how they were created in the first place and how they got to the Tylers. Maggie and Sami, however, were also interested in gold, but purely for practical purposes. First of all, they asked what Grandma, she would bequeath them any of it, right? Liz was confused and replied confusedly that it went without saying that the jewelry would go to her relatives after her. Why don't you sell them now? Sami once asked, and his eyes ran strangely. Why shouldn't the gold sit idle? Liz gasped with indignation. How dare he call a centuries-old heritage just gold and say such a thing? At first, Liz thought that she would live much better in the company of her grandchildren, who had come to look after her while she recovered. But she soon realized that this was not the case. Somehow, very quickly, her pension was at the disposal of her grandchildren. And according to them, everything in the stores was terribly expensive, which is why her pension was running out so quickly. Liz, who used to buy everything herself before the grandchildren arrived, naturally wondered whether prices had risen so quickly. Well, Grandma, what do you want? Maggie shook her head. And besides, we look after you here. We don't work, by the way. We live on our own money. Do you think it's easy? What else was an old woman to do? She sighed and tried not to talk about money anymore, especially since there was still some savings in the accounts, so. Joffrey, I want to give you power of attorney for the money, Liz said one day. I don't want to say anything bad about your brother and sister. They're here. They're looking after me. They even took me to the clinic for scans. But only. Grandma Joffrey interrupted her. I realize that maybe I'm wrong to say this. Just don't encourage that couple too much, okay? And then Joffrey explained to the old lady what the matter was. And the point was that Maggie hadn't worked while she was living in her hometown. Yeah, she was a student. But then she was expelled for failing grades. And for a while she lived with her boyfriend, or rather with a man, a market trader, who was a good 10 years older than her. Then he kicked her out and Maggie went back to her father. Sami didn't go anywhere at all. It was like he was looking for himself. And Joffrey said that his half-brother had a bad habit of drinking, just like his father. How Liz gasped. I've never seen him drunk. He's clever, Joffrey explained. He drinks beer in the evening when no one can see him. But if he's like his father, he won't stop there. And you? Don't you drink? Liz asked cautiously. No, Joffrey shook his head and his eyes sparkled. My mother took me to an old man in the village when I was a child. He healed me of the scourge. I didn't realize you were so superstitious. Liz grinned. I'm not superstitious, I just use every opportunity to improve my life, said Joffrey thoughtfully, regardless of their origin, unless it's criminal, of course. Then the grandson returned to the subject of the conversation. He said that Maggie and Sami had discussed among themselves that, theoretically, Grandma's apartment was worth a lot of money, and it was not wise for her to live here alone in her old age. He said they wanted to split it up and evict Liz. That's enough. Grandmother was suddenly angry. She couldn't listen to any more bad things being said about her grandchildren. They weren't perfect people, but they were still her own blood. Suddenly Liz thought that maybe Joffrey wasn't entirely pure of spirit. Maybe he was deliberately speaking ill of his brother and sister. They're nobody to him. Maybe he's the one who wants to take over everything. Liz was so nervous that she said it all to Joffrey's face. He listened carefully. He didn't deny it, didn't take offense. He just said he was clean, he knew it, and that was enough for him. He had taken a leave of absence to look after his grandmother, and he seemed to be coping well with those duties. But if you trust them more than you trust me, if you think I'm unnecessary, then I can leave, Joffrey said quietly, leaving the room, and that was the end of their conversation. Liz's heart was troubled because she knew she had hurt her grandson, but she was also the kind of person who wasn't used to being the first to apologize. Liz's health, meanwhile, was getting better and worse. In fact, she could get up on her own. She could walk to the bathroom, to the toilet, but sometimes she was wobbly, dizzy, and Liz realized that at this rate she would be sick until the summer, and maybe even until the fall. And even more anxious in her heart, she realized what to do. Couldn't the young people really live here with her forever? But the thought of going to some specialized boarding house for the elderly was unbearable. Gradually, insomnia was added to the malaise. Liz could lie in bed until morning, remembering that. There was a time in her life. There had been a special time in her life when she had almost chosen a different fate for herself. She had barely been a student then. She came, I remember, to one of her first classes. "Move over, please," said young Liz to a young red-haired guy who was sitting at the desk and had so sat down, so arranged his books and notebooks, that there was no room for her. "You can do it," said the boy, and he looked up at her with his piercing evil eyes, which instantly made him look like a cunning fox. "I'll let you in for a kiss." Liz's jaw dropped at the insolence, the shamelessness. She was about to angrily reprimand the scoundrel, but then he smiled in a completely disarming way. "Just kidding. Sit down, of course." And she sat down. There was no time to look for another seat in the auditorium. The professor had already arrived. Soon Liz was informed by her classmates about who the redhead was. His name was Alex Weiss, and he was the son of a fashion model and a man from abroad, or rather a businessman from Sweden. Now he lived with his mother, but he often went to visit his father. His father often gave him gifts. That's why Alex was dressed fashionably and everything imported. That's why everyone wanted to be friends with him. "He's generous," said Lillian, one of the students. "He takes girls to restaurants." "I'm not going to a restaurant with him," Liz snorted. But it turned out that Alex had plans to go to a restaurant with Liz. He invited her, and also gave her flowers. She said no. Once, twice, a second time, a third time, a fourth time. "Okay," Alex said, and smiled as completely conquering as he had the first time. "Then let's go to my cottage." Liz almost hit him on the head with a bouquet of tiger lilies for such insolence. But Alex saved himself by quickly explaining the situation. His father had come to visit him. He and his mother had gone to the dacha and said that Alex could call all the friends he wanted. "There are a lot of old books there," Alex said. "I thought you might be interested in naming," and he named a couple of books that took Liz's breath away. They were terribly rare editions that even Grandpa Elliot didn't have. "Okay," she said, licking her lips nervously. "So it's no big deal? Just a visit?" "I swear I'll behave like a knight." He bowed jokingly. "Do you think I don't know what knights often seek before the lady of their heart?" Liz asked with a squint. She went to the cottage. And everything was really very decent there. They grilled kebabs, went boating, sang to the guitar by the fire. The young people didn't hooliganize, and the adults didn't disturb them. In the end, they themselves needed to be alone with each other. "How can your mother do that?" sighed Liz, who suddenly found this story of love with a foreigner very romantic. "Why didn't she go to him and take you with her?" "She doesn't want to. She has grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts and other relatives here," Alex answered. "She says that I'll finish my studies and then I'll decide where I'll live." Then Alex took his special guest to look at books. Liz's hands were trembling with excitement. It was so magical to touch old books. And it turned out that she and Alex had more common interests than it seemed before. So he too knew the legend of Princess Pelagia's gold. However, he said that he had a book in which the legend is set out in a form somewhat different from the generally accepted version. "And what is in it?" Liz asked curiously. Alex told her everything and even let her read it. In the version that Liz had known since childhood, Pelagia was the only princely daughter, and the gold she had gotten as a dowry had been cursed by another maiden. That other maiden, named Amelie, was the daughter of a goldsmith and had the misfortune to fall in love with the same guy Pelagia had been married to. Legend has it that this curse was supposed to bring misfortune to the young family, but salvation came from the fact that Pelagia and Nick, although married by the will of their parents, but over time really managed to love each other, and that's why the evil spells were not afraid of them. And the Tylers, according to this legend, were the direct descendants of this very Pelagia. However, the book in Alex's collection said something different. Pelagia was the daughter of a prince, yes, that was true. And she had a fiancé who was married off. But Amelie was not the daughter of a goldsmith, but a girl from Pelagia's maids, and her love for Nikita struck her after he had become the husband of the prince's daughter. Amelie, consumed with jealousy, angry at the fact that life is so unfair, some all, and others nothing. Sometimes, when no one saw her, she took out the casket with Pelagia's dowry and tried on her jewelry, imagining that she had become so rich and noble suddenly, as in a fairy tale. One day she was caught by Nick himself. Naturally, the poor girl was frightened. But the young master was not angry. And then Amelie tried on the jewelry again. Now Nick himself allowed her to fool around like that, and also gave her a silk handkerchief, and by the way again asked for payment for everything in the form of a kiss. So it went on for a long time, until one day Pelagia suddenly found that from her chest of drawers missing ring with a ruby, and it was her favorite among all the magnificent jewelry. Naturally, they started looking for it. The ring was found in Amelie's mattress. Pelagia might have forgiven the poor girl, but she did not hold back and said everything she thought about her mistress, and also said that the young master became so cold to Pelagia because he had long loved another. At that time, by the way, Nick was not at the estate, he had gone hunting. Pelagia was furious. She said that if Amelie was so sure that Nick loved her, if she was so sure that he would save her from anywhere, if she wanted to own the gold herself. Well, you shall have it all, said Pelagia gloomily. She ordered the maid to be dressed in a silk dress, to braid pearls in her braid, and to put on her gold jewelry from the chest. And then she ordered her to take her into the forest and there to be chained to a tree, to leave her for the wolves to prey on. Let it be so, said Pelagia, looking at the unfortunate victim from the height of her raven mare, on which she sat in a lady's saddle of scarlet morocco. If Nick finds you, I will not interfere with your happiness. Run to the ends of the earth with him, and take the gold. I don't want it. It'll be yours. Maybe it'll bring you happiness. But if the wolves find you before, well then, that's your fate. And Pelagia and her faithful servants rode off. Amelie stayed in the thicket of the forest, and soon she heard the howling of wolves. She did not know that Nick was not so far away. He was hunting and just chased one wolf. It was a huge old beast. Nick and his friends had already killed its family, a she-wolf and her cubs, and now he was eager to get the skin of the beast. Nick had already imagined how he would dress it better and throw it at the feet of his Amelie. And it so happened that Nick's horse got ahead, and his companions, also dashing hunters, lagged behind. And then, suddenly Nick flew into the clearing. One awkward step, it was a hole, a burrow of some beast met, and the horse flew, fell down, the rider over his head tumbled. And then Nick, barely rising, saw what was happening in the clearing. He saw Amelie standing by a tree, and a wolf that stood on its hind legs and opened its huge, toothy maw, breathing in her face. Nick looked behind him for his bow and arrow, but both remained on the saddle and the horse. He had run away because he was afraid of the wolf. Nick reached for his belt. There should have been a dagger there, but he remembered that he had lost it in the battle with the she-wolf, and he realized that he was unarmed. "Don't touch her," Nick shouted, as if the wolf could understand human speech. "Let go of my beloved, and then I'll let you go." The beast clamped his ears, growled muffled, and then suddenly rushed into the thicket. Nick rushed to the girl. He untangled the ropes, patted her white cheeks, and brought her to her senses. Amelie told him everything. "Now you have nothing more to fear," said Nick. "Let's go out of the woods and then decide how to proceed." And they walked slowly. They thought that they were about to meet Nick's companions, but the forest was silent, as if it had all died out. The sun, meanwhile, was waning towards sunset, but before its disk touched the horizon, the edge of the forest appeared. Nick, with a joyful cry, rushed towards it. Just for a moment he took his hand away from Amelie's hand. Just for a moment he left it behind his back. There was a terrible cry. Nick turned around and saw that Amelie was lying on the ground and above her standing the same wolf. The man and the predator looked into each other's eyes. And suddenly Nick's head was pierced by a sharp pain. A foreign, heavy, rumbling like thunder voice broke into it, which said, "You did not spare my beloved, my little ones. So why should I spare yours?" A moment later, the wolf took a powerful leap and disappeared into the forest. Nick rushed to his beloved, but Amelie was no longer breathing. And then the other hunters arrived. There were shouts, noise. But how much that wolf was not looking for, and could not find a single trace of it, as if through the ground fell through. Nick returned to his lawful wedded wife. He told her everything. "I will continue to be your husband," he said, and threw at her feet jewelry, which he took off Amelie. "But I'm afraid our bloodline is now cursed." Legend had it that the jewelry that had been preserved for posterity since Pelagia's time did not always bring misfortune to everyone. But sometimes it happened that they seemed to come to life. That is, the old curse came to life. And then families were destroyed because of the gold, and relatives began to fight among themselves like hungry wolves. Liz was very impressed with this version of the legend. It was much darker, and, despite all the folktale elements, somehow it even seemed more realistic. And since that day, Liz suddenly realized that she felt sympathy for Alex, and that sympathy soon turned into love. Except that love never had a chance. Because one day Alex announced that he had made a decision. He was going to his father. "It's better that way." "What about me?" Liz asked. "What if I ask you to stay?" "You're too young," he replied with a chuckle. "But we're about the same age," she objected indignantly. "You don't understand," Alex sighed. "You're a nice girl, Liz, but you and I, it's not going to work out. But you know what? Let me tell you something. I'll always be a good friend to you, even 100 years from now." "I'll need you in 100 years, old grandfather," Liz grumbled. Contrary to her own expectations, for some reason she didn't feel pain at the refusal, but only disappointment and some light sadness, as if this refusal was destined by fate itself. Alex said that he would always and forever remain her friend, and that if one day in her life there would be hard times, she could turn to him. And he even said that he would bequeath the same to his children, that they should consider Liz their friend, and if Alex was no longer in the world, that they would help her if she needed it. Liz said she only wanted Alex to leave her alone forever. But then, before he left, she added that it was okay. Maybe she would see him again someday. "I'm not coming for help," Liz said. "I'm inviting you to my wedding, so you can see how happy I've become." Liz had such big, bright plans for her life. But she didn't invite Alex to the wedding. She thought, why would she? Why bring up the past? They were so young and stupid, talking such nonsense. Some stupid oaths he'd made up about helping her. That's for legends and stories, not for real life. And then, the day after her wedding, Liz hid the sheet with Alex's address and phone number far away, at the bottom of the box where the gold was kept. Liz couldn't understand why she remembered that particular part of her life. And then she realized, because she couldn't help but wonder how things would have turned out if Alex had become her husband then, if he hadn't rejected her. Would she probably have a different daughter, not Christy, and different grandchildren? Maybe she would be sitting on a veranda somewhere in Sweden, surrounded by a large, friendly family and drinking tea, looking at the blossoming garden. And now what's here? Or, no matter how you spin it, you can't escape your fate. Some more time passed. And Liz began to notice that she was feeling better. Slowly, little by little, but she felt better. Now she could go out to the entrance and sit on the bench. But there were other grandmothers sitting there, and she had nothing to talk to them about, because they all talked about their own things, about medicines, prices in stores, and she, Liz, was not interested in such things. But she, Liz, at least had some fun sitting like that. And then one day at home, a terrible thing happened. It all started with Sami coming home drunk. In fact, Liz had sent her grandchildren to the store to buy something for the festive table. Her birthday was approaching, and the old lady wanted to celebrate it modestly. But as it happened, Geoffrey, who had left home earlier, he had gone to the other side of town to buy medicine for his grandmother. When he came back, he was furious. He started telling off his brother and sister. There was a fight. And then they all fought. And Liz was sure that Geoffrey had started it. She'd yelled at him too, telling him to be more tolerant of his relatives. Tolerant? Geoffrey was so indignant and tense that his face was even blotchy. What kind of people are they, Grandma? They should be thrown out. Oh, we're talking, Maggie said with her arms at her sides. You want to get your own place, don't you? What do you mean? Liz didn't understand. And then it was explained to her. It turned out that Geoffrey had gone to the lawyers to consult. He wanted to know if it was possible to arrange it so that Liz could write a gift quickly, Anyway, he wanted her to give him the apartment. Grandmother, Geoffrey sighed. I can explain everything, really. You've got it all wrong. I just want to make sure. To keep you safe. If you gave me the apartment, he said, pointing his finger at his brother and sister, wouldn't be able to get it. They wouldn't be able to get it. And you would continue to live here in complete safety. And he also found out about the nursing home. Liz almost fainted at these words. She hadn't expected such treachery from the man she had thought for years to be better than her own grandchildren. Grandmother Geoffrey stepped toward her, but Liz recoiled. I didn't ask about a nursing home, but about a clinic, a vacation home, so that you could improve your health and then. That's it. Get away from me. Liz was hysterical. What the hell are you thinking? No, you're not my grandson anymore. Maggie, granddaughter, take me to bed. I don't feel well. Geoffrey tried to explain that his intentions were purest, that he just wanted to keep Liz safe from people who really wanted to hurt her. Except she didn't listen to him. She wailed, she cried. And then she told Geoffrey in a harsh, scathing voice that she renounced him, that he was a stranger to her, and that she was sorry that her daughter, Christy, had been a good stepmother to such a monster for so many years. Geoffrey listened attentively and silently. He didn't try to object. He didn't try to defend himself or justify himself in any other way. And Liz took it all as a confirmation of his guilt. Get out of my house, she said at the end. And the grandson didn't leave. He just packed up and left. Silently, without saying goodbye. Liz cried bitterly. Maggie fussed with her heart drops. Sami had said it was for the best, that everything would be all right now. What Liz didn't see was that her grandson and granddaughter looked at each other for a moment, and their faces contorted into a wicked grin. In the evening, Liz felt sick at heart and had to call an ambulance. The doctors, who had been briefed on the situation very roughly and one-sidedly, said that of course stress at that age is extremely harmful to the body, so the old lady just needed to rest. And for a few days, the sick Liz spent like in a dream. And then something else happened. That evening, it was raining outside the window. It seemed like a flood. There was thunder. All in all, it was a very unfavorable weather atmosphere. An hour ago, she had asked Maggie to make her some herbal remedies for insomnia, but her granddaughter had not yet fulfilled her grandmother's wish. And Liz had no idea why Sami had returned drunk again. Apparently, Maggie was having a talk with him now, as voices could be heard coming from the kitchen. Liz climbed out of bed. Overcome with weakness, she wanted a cup of tea. She could use a snack, like a cheese sandwich. But she did not dare to call Maggie again. She would rather let her brother take care of him. She must save the boy, lest he should get into this trouble. And she, Liz, would get there by herself. Nothing would happen to her. Noiselessly, the old woman left her room and moved, holding on to the wall, into the kitchen. She could hear the voices clearly now. It was only a short distance from the door to the kitchen, but then Liz froze, because strange words came to her ears. I'm sick of the old one, Maggie said. Cleaning her up, washing her. She stinks. I'm tired. All day long, I'm tied up at home like a leash. And I'm still young. I want to live. Yes, we've been sitting here too long, said Sami with a grin. Good thing that idiot left. I thought he would ruin everything. What are we going to do? Asked the granddaughter. The old woman's gold should be divided, and she should be taken to the city dump, said Sami. No, you imagine how much gold there will be there, eh? To the dump. Maggie repeated after her brother thoughtfully. You don't mean that literally, do you? And who knows me? Sami chuckled. Well, maybe not to the dump, but to a shelter. There are free do not know, and I don't want to pay. I'm sick of everything, said Maggie. I thought my grandmother would give me something to eat. Have you seen how many old books and clothes there are? What's the use? They're all junk. They should be taken to the dump and sell the apartment. Sami banged his fist. Fool, said Maggie. Maybe there's something antique. Sometimes they pay big money for such things. The rich get fat, Sami replied. Something rumbled and clinked in the kitchen, as if they were pouring a drink from a bottle. It was about time that idiot was kicked out by his grandmother. He wanted to be the first to get a piece. Want some? Poor Maggie said. No, I don't think he wanted to steal. He probably wanted to save the old woman. What an idiot. Who the hell is he? Nothing, Sami chuckled. She kicked him out. Now he won't save her. Now we'll decide everything by ourselves. That's enough. The old woman has lived and lived. It's time for us to get everything. And the gold is the most important. Maybe it's worth $1 million. What do you think? Liz didn't remember how, but she walked quietly back. She closed the door and lay on the bed, stretched out on her back, her arms folded across her chest. She heard her heart thudding knock, 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 knock beneath her hands, and she thought it would stop once. And it would stop now. What she heard was like a forest fire that consumes the young growth. It was like a tub of water being splashed on a freshly painted canvas, and it washed away all the colors. Liz's world turned upside down, back and forth, spinning and falling somewhere. The old woman couldn't get it into her head. Was this happening to her? Was it not a terrible dream? Or maybe it was really a dream? Maybe she fell asleep to a program that tells about how soulless and heartless sometimes children and grandchildren are, and that's how she dreamed it. How much time had passed, Liz didn't know. But judging by the way the moon moved across the sky and peered through the window with its ghostly disk, it was already night. The door opened and a dark silhouette peered into the dark room. Liz had turned off the lights when she returned. "Grandma, are you asleep?" the silhouette asked in Maggie's voice. Liz held her breath, hiding on the bunk, pretending to sleep, because she knew for sure that if she said a word or glanced at it now, it would be the end. Maggie would realize that she'd heard everything. And then what would happen to her? What would they do to her? The morning of the next day was clear and sunny. The weather was so sunny that one could think that the universe itself was smiling at you, looking in the window. So stop sulking. Get up. Live life to the fullest. But this morning seemed just black to Liz. She waited with fear for Maggie to look in on her, and when her granddaughter came, Liz was shaking every moment. What if she realized from her eyes that she knew everything? But Maggie didn't seem to know anything. She fed Liz with semolina porridge on water as usual, because she was on a diet, gave her tea, gave her another piece of bread, and said she was going to go to the store. She added about her brother, saying that Sami had gone to see if there was any need for laborers at the market. "I can't live on your pension alone, you know," Maggie sighed, pretending to be sad. "I don't know how we're going to get by." "I'm almost well now," granddaughter Liz smiled shyly, her lips trembling. "Thank you, my darlings, for helping me to get back on my feet. You'll soon be able to come home. I'm used to being on my own for years." "What are you talking nonsense, grandmother?" Maggie laughed, but her eyes were not merry and cold. "This is our home. We are, after all, your heirs." "No, grandmother," Maggie wagged her finger at her. "We're not going anywhere from you now. We're not going anywhere. We're going to keep a close eye on you." "Well, I'm off. I'm young. I have to be on time for everything." Liz was as quiet as a mouse until Maggie packed up and left the house. When the key clicked in the lock, the old woman exhaled long and hard. Oh, how she wanted to feel sorry for herself, to sit and cry. But I realized, this is not the case. She had to hurry. She had to save herself before her grandson and granddaughter threw away the Tyler family's legacy. Rising carefully, Liz reached the closet, pulled up a chair. Oh, scary. At her age, falling from such a height could kill you. But her body didn't let her down, and so Liz took a large shoebox from the top of the closet. It was junk, but it held what was dearer to her than anything else in the world: Princess Pelagia's gold. She untangled the old shawls and handkerchiefs that wrapped the carved wooden chest. It had been a long, long time since she had looked in it. Perhaps 5 years already. And why would she do that? Lately, contact with the family history had been painful, stirring up unnecessary memories, making her question the decisions she'd once made. Liz knew there were priceless treasures under the lid, and a notebook with the address and phone number of a man she'd sworn she'd never ask for help. And actually, this is all so silly. Well, really. Alex, then Liz realized she had to call. She had to call. Slowly, tautly, the lid lifted with the creak of ancient wood. Liz knew what she must see: the dull glow of gold in the midday sun. But what appeared before her? The old woman froze, her eyes rounded. Her heart skipped a beat. No, it was impossible. It couldn't be. But the sight did not lie, and she reached into the casket with a trembling hand and took out something she had not expected to find. Not that Joffrey was prepared for such a development, but he sensed that if Granny knew what he was up to, she wouldn't give him a hard time. Because Liz, unfortunately, is too kind and somewhat naive in a person who is in the captivity of his own illusions. Therefore, Joffrey only had to be extremely careful. But at some point, things didn't go according to plan, and he, damn it, was not even allowed to explain himself normally with his grandmother. He wanted to lash out at the two vultures who had the nerve to call themselves Grandma Liz's grandson and granddaughter, but he didn't. Because he realized that this time there would be no victory on his side. And in order to be able to continue to do everything normally, and not to ruin the relationship with his grandmother under the influence of others, Joffrey decided to leave her house. Just for a while, just for a day or two. And then, it was only necessary to buy time, when the vultures, damned vultures, would not be in the apartment and could talk to his grandmother about everything. That was Joffrey's plan. And it wasn't bad at all. The guy stood at the bus stop, under its iron visor, and waited for the bus. While he was waiting for transportation, he went to the internet via smartphone and renewed the lease of a daily apartment, which he had already looked for a long time, because it was getting harder and harder to live in an apartment. And Joffrey decided that he would live there first, and then he would probably rent an apartment for a longer period of time because he would have to stay in the city for his grandmother's business. Joffrey was heartily grateful to the university authorities, who, having heard about his family's circumstances, granted him a leave of absence without any criticism or reproach. Raising the collar of his jacket, it was pouring rain. Joffrey stretched his neck, looking for the bus. And then, everything happened in a flash. Just one car at the crossroads suddenly lost control, probably because of the wet road, or maybe something happened to the brakes, but it was suddenly carried to the side. People from the bus stop scattered. Joffrey, immersed in his thoughts, hesitated. And then there was a blow, a flash of deafening pain and darkness. "Am I all right?" was the first thing Joffrey asked when he woke up. And he asked it for two reasons. First, there was no pain in his body, which was naturally suspicious after such a collision. And second, there was a marvelous golden-haired creature leaning over him, who could easily be mistaken for a guide to a better world. Like those who are dying to lead through the tunnel to the eternal light. Alive and not even broken, which is amazing, said a gruff voice. And the marvelous creature was displaced by a bearded man in a hospital gown. The doctor, and it was he, introduced himself to Harry and told him that Joffrey had been lucky to get away with a few bruises and a suspected concussion. All he had to do was not cross the road at a red light. What? Joffrey's eyes widened. The car lost control. No, the doctor frowned. Don't you start laying blame on me. Eyewitnesses saw you step into the roadway thinking about something. They called out to you, but you ran like a rhinoceros right into the car, which did lose control a little. Yeah, Joffrey squirmed guiltily against the cushions, remembering that he'd been so absorbed in thought that he'd taken a careless step forward. So, if it hadn't been for my own stupidity, it wouldn't have hit me, maybe. And who is this? He asked and wanted to stretch his neck. Because the broad shoulders of the doctor blocked the golden-haired woman, but immediately shrieked from the shooting pain in his neck. "The one you scared to death," replied the girl. "And the perpetrator of the incident, apparently." What Joffrey smiled weakly. "No, they say it was my own fault," said the girl. "And I'm to blame," said the girl. "I should have minimized speed in the rain, but I just did not expect." "So don't argue now, okay?" Gennady said sternly. "Why did I allow you to see the patient at all? In general, will you write a claim for damage to health? The guilty party is ready to pay for all treatment and also compensation for moral damage." The girl nodded hastily. But the last thing Geoffrey could think about now was money. "No one else was hurt," the girl said. "Well, just my car had hit a concrete fence." "Are you all right?" shrieked Geoffrey. As you can see, she smiled charmingly. The airbag didn't fail. "Well, here's my phone." With these words, she put a sheet on the bedside table. "I'll be in touch. I won't run away. And here's one more thing." She dug into her purse and pulled out a wad of bills. "I withdrew it from the nearest ATM. It's here, near the hospital. I keep the rest at home, in cash. I'll bring it all back by tonight." "Wait a minute," Geoffrey squinted, his head spinning as if he'd been forced on a merry-go-round for hours on end. "What's your name?" Larry replied, "A beautiful woman with a golden mane of curly hair who looked to be in her early 20s. And now, please, the visiting hours are all ready." Gennady got into the conversation again. "You can come back later. And right now the young man needs rest and I must tell him about his condition. Further necessary observation, treatment." "Yes, of course. Larry's making a fuss. Get well and... Forgive me, I'm sorry, it's very just terrible," she added from the doorway. Geoffrey smiled weakly at her. He didn't feel sick and broken. On the contrary, light as a cloud. "Don't get too excited," the doctor warned. "Soon the effect of drugs will go down and I'll feel every bone. But don't worry, we'll find you some weaker painkillers. In the meantime, let's talk about this. Who are your contacts?" "No," said Geoffrey. "I'm from out of town. My father's there, but he won't be able to come for sure." "That's too bad," the doctor shook his head. "Someone has to take care of you. You'll be out of the hospital soon." "I'm renting an apartment," Geoffrey went on. "I was thinking of renting for a long time. I have a grandmother in town." "That's great. We'll let my grandmother know." "No," exclaimed the boy, and seeing how the doctor's eyebrows went up, explained. "She can't worry, she's sick herself and there's no point anyway. She and we had a very big quarrel." "Would you like me to share an observation? As a doctor who's been here for 20 years, no matter how much relatives fight, usually when someone goes to the hospital, all the fuss and misunderstandings go away. Relatives, usually do not abandon." "Well, all right," Geoffrey sighed. "But let's do it tomorrow already. Grandma, she thinks I'm just sitting in my apartment anyway, and she's not going to come looking for me today." Liz felt like a complete fool, an idiot, as she dialed that very phone number. She was well aware of how much time had passed and that it could have been changed 100 times already. And anyway, in the age of digital technology, it was reasonable to assume that instead of a landline phone, everyone was using a cell phone, which meant that the only way to get in touch with Alex, if he was still alive at all, would be to send a letter. And he might not have lived at that address for decades, and how long that letter would take. And yet, Liz dialed the number. "You old fool," she told herself after the 6th ringtone, but the receiver was suddenly picked up. They answered in English, and Liz's mind was so out of foreign language it was like a foreign language. The other end asked, "Who is this?" and probably would have hung up, thinking it was a prank call, but then Liz finally pulled herself together and asked Alex. "Who is it?" they asked. "You see, Grandpa's not very well." "But is he sane?" Liz blurted out, suddenly afraid that Alex might, theoretically, be suffering from dementia. Liz, almost crying, began to apologize and say that she was just an old acquaintance of his, and she didn't think that she would catch him after so many years, and she was very, very sorry for the indelicacy. "But if you can, tell him that it's Lizanka calling, the same one who once visited him at his dacha." "All right," said a man's voice on the other side, uncertainly. "I'll ask my grandfather now. Wait, okay?" Liz thanked Mikhail, the man who had introduced himself as Alex's son, and waited. Her heart was beating fast and it seemed too heavy. Is he going to tell her something? And in general, why is she calling him? What does he recognize it's time an old man? Can she, an old woman from his distant past, help her now? He lives in another country. This is ridiculous. No, Liz thought she should end the call now, tear the sheet with the number, and address to shreds, forget the whole thing and try to. Liz? The voice she heard was exactly as she remembered it, and for a split second the past and the future seemed to blend together. Alex, Liz breathed out. You're alive. Liz couldn't take it anymore, and she started to cry. Okay, first of all, calm down. His voice was as stern as it was soothing. I suppose you didn't call me for the first and only time after all these years to talk about Silver Age poetry. Tell me what happened, and we'll figure out what to do next. Joffrey hated being sick. It came from his childhood when his father, under the influence of his neighbor Aunt Ducia, a great admirer of folk medicine, had treated his flu with steam from a pot of potatoes and some disgusting fat dissolved in hot milk. And so, although the hospital was clean and even fed good food, and the neighbors on the ward were quiet and decent, and although the nurse was young and cheerful, but from the face of Joffrey still did not go sour, dissatisfied with everything in the world Mina. Naturally, it was necessary to settle all the formalities that he had no claims to Larry. By the way, they talked not only about the business topic, but also about everything. It turned out that Laurie was born and raised in this city, and once, almost 15 years ago, her parents, who had previously lived in Sweden, moved here because the family had roots here. When she learned that Joffrey was studying to be a jeweler, Laurie laughed and said it was a funny coincidence, almost because she had already studied to be a geologist and dreamed of devoting her life to precious and ornamental stones. Have you got a boyfriend? Joffrey suddenly blurted out. You ask too many questions for someone I hit with a car. Larry wagged her finger at him, and then suddenly got serious and answered. No, and I'm not ready for a relationship yet. Love, it's too complicated. First you need to stand firmly on your feet, to live for yourself, and then already let another person into your life. That makes sense, Joffrey nodded, his hair reddening. I asked you that, by the way, without thinking. I'm not hitting on you. Look, I'm getting discharged tomorrow, he sighed. On the daily I still prolonged, I'll lie there, then I'll look at other apartments, well, to rent for a long time. In general, thank you for offering moral compensation and all that, but I cannot agree to it. Thank you for giving me more money for treatment. And so, my father will send me, I'm fine, I'll hold out. But he will send in 3 days only. I've already paid for the apartment for these days. In general. Joffrey again sighed. Honestly, I have only 500 rubles in my wallet. Can you pay for a cab to get me to my apartment? I'm afraid I'll have a hard time taking public transportation. My back hurts. I'll drive you, she said, and hastily, noticing how Joffrey's eyes rounded, added, not me, but my father. He can take you in the car. I won't drive again for a while, I'm afraid. Also, I've been thinking. Well, since you're a little short on money then. You know, my dad's at the country house. An old country house, built in the 50s or even earlier. Maybe. Will you stay with us? Well, while you're recovering. Fresh air. And there's no worries, my dad has a woman working there. Tina's name is Tina. She's a great maid and cook. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm rambling, it's the first time it's happened. And with a car and a man. It's the first time. Joffrey blurted out and then stopped talking, because the joke was stupid, inappropriate, and not about anything. Laurie looked at him in confusion too, and then for some reason they laughed together. You agree, Guy, came the voice of a neighbor in the ward, 40-year-old metallurgist, who went to the hospital with an industrial injury. If in my 20s such a girl offered me a visit, I would fly like a dove if I didn't go. Joffrey sighed. Maybe. It really wasn't such a bad option, was it? It had been a few days since he'd left his grandmother's apartment, by the way, and he thought that Liz must have cooled down enough to listen to him. And they had to talk. Judging by the way the half-brother and sister were behaving, it was urgent to rescue Grandma from their company. With Larry agreed that she would pick him up the next day in the morning. That evening, however, Joffrey dialed Liz's number. He waited. He called back. But the caller was unavailable. His heart felt uneasy, and he dialed Maggie's number. She seemed a little more human to him than Sami's brother. She's not here. Maggie blurted out with an intonation that betrayed confusion, indignation, and deep drunkenness. "She's gone, the old fool." "Where?" asked Joffrey. "How should I know?" Maggie shrieked. "We caught her in the driveway. She got in the car with some guy, a man in a suit, and said that she was going on vacation. And we. She said that she was tired and needed to think about everything. That man is a bore said that we do not think." "How did he say?" "Ah, intrigue. No, can you imagine?" Joffrey had no idea. Rubbing the bridge of his nose nervously, he didn't know what to think. Who and where could quiet, timid Grandma Liz have gone? What if, exhausted by the bad company of her grandchildren, she'd gotten involved with some kind of crook, cult, black realtor? Joffrey felt a pang of guilt. He was good, too. He should have realized what rotten people his brother and sister were, and he should have been more decisive, should have talked to Liz instead of not scheming himself. By the way, Maggie continued in a stuttering voice. "What's the word intrigue, huh?" "I have no idea," Joffrey smirked, though of course he knew the meaning of the word perfectly well. "Bye, then," and he ended the conversation. He was in a state of shock. Where could Grandma Liz have gone? And with whom? Why wasn't she answering his calls? In fact, Joffrey realized with his mind that she had probably not yet discovered that something very important to her was missing, her main jewel, namely gold. Yes, Joffrey had left his grandmother's apartment for a reason. A couple of days before Liz had thrown him out in a scandal, he had taken advantage of her absence. She had been with Maggie and Sami at the clinic to go into her room, and knowing perfectly well where the treasure chest had been kept all these years, had taken it out. He opened it, put the gold in a box, and put it in his inconspicuous sports traveling bag. In place, that is, at the bottom of the chest, put a note in which he explained everything as it is. "Mole, I'm taking this, grandmother, to save for you, because your grandchildren relatives are already thinking about how to divide it." In general, Joffrey, when all this was arranged, hoped that he would be able to personally with his grandmother to talk about all this before she noticed the disappearance of gold jewelry. After all, he knew for a fact that she had not touched them for years, and therefore theoretically she should not have noticed that they were missing. But anything could have happened. And now Joffrey wondered, and if she had found out that they were missing, how had she reacted? Did she believe what he said in the note? Just words, with no proof that he was right? Or did she curse him as a dishonorable thief? Or maybe Granny had already filed a complaint against him. But Joffrey thought if the latter was true, they would probably have found him in the hospital by now and come to him here. So where was the truth? And who the hell had taken his grandmother away, and where? On the day he was discharged from the hospital, Joffrey was worried sick. His own consent seemed to him a rash folly. After all, he hardly knew Larry at all, and he had already accepted an invitation to visit her at home. And not even at home, but at her country cottage. But on the other hand, why would she plot something evil against him? It's more like she's trying to make it up to him for hitting him with her car. The day he was discharged from the hospital, Larry and her father came to pick him up. Vincent, a solid-looking man in a suit, shook Joffrey's hand and said he sympathized with him and was grateful that he had agreed to a peaceful resolution to the whole thing. "Yes, it was nothing," replied Joffrey with a look as if his cars were being hit on a weekly and regular basis. From the hospital, they went first to a rented apartment. They had to pack their things, which, fortunately, were few. Unnoticed by his new acquaintances, Joffrey poked his hand into the bag with the gold. The box with it seemed to be still inside. The jewelry rustled if the bag was shaken. On the way to the cottage, we got to talking to Vincent. It turned out that he is engaged in honey business. He said that he owns several apiaries, supplies bee products to many stores, and in general does not regret that he settled here. Because here is his real home. Here has felt some special, almost mystical connection with the ancestors. "My father is thinking of coming here this year," too, Vincent said, "for a visit. I don't want to disturb. Well, I mean, it's a family atmosphere, and here's a stranger." "It's all right," Vincent smiled, "but I must warn you. Besides me and Tina and you, there will be one other person living at the cottage. A pensioner, an old acquaintance of my father's." "That's all right," said Joffrey. "I have a grandmother myself." "Larry said you had a fight with her?" Vincent grinned. "Generational differences?" "Something like that," Joffrey said, not wanting to be privy to any personal squabbles. Family circumstances, he said, staring thoughtfully out the window at the summer scenery and planning how to look for Granny, because of course he couldn't leave it at that. Wow. That was all Joffrey could say when the cottage appeared in front of them, when they drove through the pine grove. At first sight it was clear it was an unusual place, which seemed to exist in some detachment from the surrounding, mundane world. The two-storied building reminded of a harem, as it is often depicted in Russian fairy tales, but at the same time it was felt that everything here was thought out for the comfort, modern convenience of the inhabitants. The lower floor was flanked by a veranda, partly glazed, partly open, with a railing and columns covered with skillful carvings and covered with some curly and lushly blooming plants. "Welcome," Vincent smiled as Joffrey got out of the car. "Here's our family, and here's our guest." From the porch of the house came a short, plump, but clearly full of vitality woman of about 50, dressed in a brightly colored dress. "You are, of course, Joffrey," she smiled broadly at the boy, introduced herself as Tina, and taking him firmly under her arm and even hugging him around the waist, led him toward the house. "I'll make you some tea now. How do you feel about raspberry jam? I made a pie with it. There's also fish pie. And soup. Cabbage salad with carrots and apple. Oh, careful, the step is sagging here, it should be fixed. Don't worry, I've prepared a bedroom for you downstairs. You're in no condition to run up and down stairs, are you?" Tina was still talking, and Joffrey couldn't get a word in edgewise. Vincent and Larry laughed at the encounter. Vincent carried Joffrey's bags into his room, and Larry joined Tina in talking about the cottage and its surroundings. "And now we have a surprise for you," Vincent said abruptly, as the little group made their way to what he said was the veranda at the back of the house, where the tea table was set. A surprise? It wasn't that Joffrey didn't like surprises, but he'd never been spoiled with them in his life, and he hadn't realized what there might be. And then when he stepped out onto the veranda and saw who was standing in front of him, he was speechless. "Grandma?" Liz smiled at her grandson and opened her arms to him, and he, still not too sure of the reality of the surrounding reality, stepped towards her. Grandma, but what are you doing here? And you?" Joffrey swallowed hard and looked into the old woman's eyes. They were warm, tender. "Have you forgiven me, Grandma?" "How could I not, grandson?" she said, and stroked his head, ruffling his already unruly hair. "I think you have a lot of questions." Joffrey nodded, but before he could say a word, Tina intervened, saying that it was best not to eat on an empty stomach, and that everyone should sit down and she would serve the pies and everything. Joffrey talked himself into taking his time, if only out of respect for the owners of the house, whose identity he was now much more concerned about, and indeed drank a cup of tea, ate a little something. And then finally Liz spoke. And to begin with, she spoke briefly about how she had met Alex in her youth, how fate had divided them, and how then, lo and behold, just the other day she had realized it was time to turn to him. It turned out that Alex couldn't help her so quickly. If he wanted to, he was far away vacationing at a resort, but he could entrust the care of an old friend to his son Vincent. "I almost went crazy when I saw him." Liz smiled. "He looks just like his father when he was young. Oh, if I weren't so old, I'd be madly in love," she said, and laughed. Liz hastened to tell Joffrey that she had overheard the whole sordid, dirty conversation between her blood grandson and granddaughter, which had opened her eyes to many things. And then, when she read Joffrey's note, a lot of things came together for her. "You know, the day after I called Alex, I went to the clinic with Sami," Liz said, "and when I got home, I saw that my room had been turned upside down. Maggie said she wanted to tidy up my room, and her eyes were running around. I knew right away it wasn't true. She's never been used to cleanliness or order, and the way everything was torn through, I realized what she really wanted. She was looking for gold." And then, a few days later, Liz said, growing sad, "Sami came to me. He had been drinking heavily. He started asking me how I was, how old I was, had I already written a will for my grandchildren. I told him to stop saying such things, but he got angry. Believe me, he pushed me so hard that I fell. What a bastard." Joffrey almost jumped up from the table, as if he were going to run to his brother to punch him in the face. Maggie calmed him down, Liz continued. I was shaking all night. I had a chair against the door. But if they'd wanted to break in, the chair wouldn't have stopped them. In the morning, Sammy apologized. Maggie begged for her brother. Well, I pretended that everything was fine, that I didn't hold a grudge. I really don't hold a grudge, Liz shrugged. What good is anger? It just eats away at your soul like rust. I decided I couldn't stay in my own house with them anymore. And then Alex talked it over with his son, and Vincent offered me a place to stay while everything was sorted out. Grandma. I always knew. Joffrey started to speak fervently, but then, pulling himself together, he continued more calmly. I always thought Maggie and Sami weren't the most decent people. I'm sorry. It's all right, Liz sighed. Life happens. I'm lucky to have one grandson. A real one.